Our story begins as everyone offers up their most valuable possessions, desperate for even the smallest reward from the white light. And yet, here we see our protagonist tossing a simple pack of spicy snacks onto the altar, drawing nothing but mockery from the crowd. They dismiss him as a penniless attention seeker, but to their shock, the altar suddenly erupts with a high-level crimson beam. From within that light emerges a mythical item never seen before, all because he has awakened a unique ability. The Eye of Truth allows him to see the hidden coordinates and specific desires of every altar he encounters. By simply offering exactly what the altar craves, he can claim the ultimate rewards for himself. He could hardly have imagined this just a few hours ago, when his life seemed to be falling apart. Back then, he was just a common worker whose savings had been drained by an ungrateful girlfriend who took his expensive gifts and left. She had hopped into a brand new Maybach without a second thought, leaving him feeling as if the sky were falling. As it turns out, the sky actually did fall, accompanied by a deafening roar as countless altars descended from the heavens. Panic instantly gripped the entire world, and in that moment of chaos, he felt a sharp, sudden stinging in his eyes. When he opened them again, he noticed a line of text floating above a nearby altar that only he could see. It read, "Altar number 666, connected to the coordinates of the infinite abyss." The text explained that after ages of dull misfortune, the entity on the other side was now craving something specific. It wanted a food that could provide an extreme, unprecedented sensory thrill, just as a crowd began to gather around. We watch as a heavy-set man tosses a piece of bread into the altar, which responds with a soft, glowing white light. A shimmering fruit appears in its place, and the man's breathing quickens as he stares at the prize. Without a moment's hesitation, he stuffs the fruit into his mouth, and his body begins to transform right before our eyes. In an instant, his excess weight vanishes, replaced by the physique of a muscular warrior, a sight that sends the crowd into a frenzy. Everyone begins throwing their most precious items into the altar, from luxury watches to gold and diamonds. We see the crowd descending into a frenzy, tossing everything they own into the altar while your mind goes completely blank. Because only he knows the truth, the entity behind this altar is actually craving nothing but an extreme sensory thrill. And as it happens, he has just the thing. A pack of Reaper's spicy strips a friend once brought him from abroad. He recalled how a single lick of those snacks left him in pain for 3 days. Surely they would satisfy the altar. If a simple piece of bread could grant a fruit of strength, he wondered what giving the altar exactly what it wanted would bring. He rushed home and tore through his belongings until he found the spicy strips, though he forced himself to remain calm. Instead of rushing back out, he opened his computer to check the news and found that the entire world had erupted in chaos. Every website was flooded with news of the altars, including a Middle Eastern sheik who sacrificed a car full of gold. That sacrifice granted him an extraordinary intent, while another billionaire brought in a literal truckload of gold bars. He dumped the entire load onto the altar, and to everyone's surprise, it responded with a rare blue light reward. The altar bestowed a glowing blue seed which, once swallowed, gave the billionaire the terrifying power to summon vines. However, another piece of news caught his eye. A failed sacrifice in Sakura country had summoned a 10-man demon. A kendo master had offered his ancestral blade, only for a vengeful spirit shrouded in black mist to emerge instead. Casualties in Sakura country were mounting rapidly, and the military had already been forced to intervene. He watched the news with a cold shiver, realizing that a failed sacrifice could invite an absolute catastrophe. This made offering exactly what the entity desired even more vital, and just then, his phone began to vibrate violently. The Dragon Country officials had issued an emergency bulletin regarding their preliminary findings on the phenomenon. As the first day of the mysterious altars drew to a close, the government's warning was clear and urgent. Their research indicated that sacrificing to these altars carried immense risks and was subject to strict limitations. Each person could only use a specific altar once, and no one was permitted more than 3 sacrifices per day. At the same time, the arrival of the altars triggered an unknown energy pulse, damaging every surveillance device across the globe. Seeing this, our protagonist felt a sudden jolt of excitement. This was, to be honest, a heaven-sent opportunity. He checked the time, 10 o'clock at night, and after packing the Reaper's spicy strips, he set off without a moment's hesitation. He slipped back to the square, which was now deserted, save for the scattered remnants of the day's offerings. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pack of spicy strips, ready to make his move. Suddenly, the altar erupted with a brilliant red light that shot straight up into the heavens. In an instant, the entire city was bathed in a bloody glow, and residents still out on the streets kilometers away were absolutely terrified by this world-shaking spectacle. And who could blame them, really? Meanwhile, we see a massive, pitch-black egg slowly manifesting upon the altar. He immediately scooped it into his arms and vanished from the scene without staying a second longer. At that very moment, alarms began blaring at the headquarters of the Dragon Country's Bureau of Abnormal Affairs. A man with a determined expression asked his team if the coordinates had been locked yet. The subordinate reported that, based on the gathered data, they had narrowed down the general area. The location on the map was none other than the West District of Jiangcheng, the very city where he lived. The general ordered the area to be classified as an S-rank observation zone and told the Jiangcheng branch to investigate at all costs. They had to find out what that red light was. By now, however, he had already retreated safely to his home. Staring at the giant egg in his arms, he felt a wave of confusion. What exactly was this thing? He told himself he couldn't exactly crack it open to make a bowl of golden fried rice. Suddenly, a line of glowing text began to emerge from the surface of the shell. It was an abyss magic dragon egg of mythic quality. Once hatched, he would have a dragon as his personal companion. Its power was said to be enough to tear even the gods asunder, and reading this, he felt a surge of pure excitement. As anyone who plays games knows, mythic is almost certainly the highest possible quality one can find. The Reaper's spicy strips certainly hadn't let him down, but suddenly, he realized something was quite unusual. He wondered why his eyes could even analyze items returned by the altar, so he rushed into the bathroom. Staring intently at the text reflected in the mirror, a new line appeared, the Eye of Truth. Its quality was unique, capable of perceiving the cause and effect of all things. By gazing at an altar, he could see its dimensional coordinates and causal requirements. By gazing at items related to the altar, he could see their quality, name, and function. So, that was how it worked. He hadn't expected these eyes to have so many uses. Suddenly, he remembered the posts he had seen earlier. Countless people had sacrificed items only to receive incomprehensible withered wood or plain, ordinary stones. They had no idea what those items did and simply let them go to waste. But for him, things were different. With just a single glance, the secrets of those objects would have nowhere to hide. The possibility of finding hidden treasures in the future was now very real. He then tucked the dragon egg into his bed. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30 at night. With only an hour and a half left before the day ended, he still had 2 chances to make a sacrifice. Thinking of this, he began packing anything that might be useful: medicated oil, a lighter, and even a book on philosophy. He didn't overlook a single thing, even items that others would consider absolute junk. Finally, after tucking a small fruit knife inside for self-defense, his gaze fell upon a photo frame on the desk. In the picture, Xiao Weiwei was smiling brightly. Realizing there was no point in keeping it, he stuffed the photo into his pocket, intending to throw it away. After leaving the house, he headed straight for the abandoned industrial zone in the west, a place that had been deserted for years. The complex terrain made it an excellent spot for his plans, but just then, his phone suddenly began to ring. The caller was none other than his ex-girlfriend, Xiao Weiwei, but he simply hung up the phone without a second thought. He blocked and deleted her contact immediately. Meanwhile, we find ourselves elsewhere, inside a luxury 5-star hotel. Xiao Weiwei was there, spending her time with a man named Zhang Yang. She had assumed he was still huddled in his broken-down rental, drowning in his own sorrow and heartbreak. To her shock, the call was disconnected instantly, and a sudden, nameless rage began to bubble up from deep within her. How dare a loser like him, someone she had dumped, have the nerve to hang up on her? "What's wrong, baby?" Zhang Yang asked. That simple greeting was enough to dissolve her rising anger, and looking at the man before her, she felt utterly satisfied. He was someone who could casually produce bags worth tens of thousands and watches worth hundreds of thousands. In this new era, these were the ultimate sacrifices, making things like deep affection and solemn oaths seem entirely worthless. To be honest, in the face of such opportunities, sentimentality didn't stand a chance. After all, when she sacrificed the Dior bag he had given her, the altar had emitted a soul-stirring green light. Even more impressive, her next 2 sacrifices also produced that rare, coveted green glow. This convinced her she was the chosen daughter of destiny, while beside her, Zhang Yang watched her with keen interest. However, deep down, his gaze held nothing but cold calculation. Initially, he had only planned to spend a little money for fun. He hadn't expected this woman's luck to be so extraordinary, hitting that green light 3 times in a row. He told himself that keeping her around might prove very useful later. Meanwhile, we returned to the abandoned industrial zone. He knew he had to find 2 suitable altars to perform his sacrifices before the clock struck midnight. Otherwise, the opportunities would be wasted. Fortunately, after walking only a few steps, he spotted an altar. The first altar he found was numbered 25091, a gateway connected to the coordinates of a junk machine spirit. This was a mechanical imp who found joy in collecting trash, possessing a nearly paranoid obsession with bottle caps. He shook his head slightly, wondering what kind of treasure a trash-collecting imp could possibly offer him. And so, after walking a bit further, another altar materialized before his eyes, this one numbered 18472. It linked to a dried-up pond where a carp spirit was currently on the verge of dying from thirst. Its only wish was for a single sip of sweet, fresh water, but this didn't satisfy his needs either. Finally, he made his way into a narrow alley filled with refuse, making sure no one was watching him. He locked his gaze onto this specific altar, which bore the ominous number 4444. It connected to the mournful theater, home to a tragic heroine trapped in an eternal loop upon the stage. She had grown utterly weary of her predestined script and now craved an item born from a genuine betrayal. She sought something saturated with extreme hatred and intense resentment, causing his breath to hitch in his throat. Not only was the number 4,444 significant, but her specific requirements were incredibly demanding. But then he remembered his own situation. Hadn't he just been dumped? He slowly pulled out a photo of Xia Weiwei. Without hesitation, he took a fruit knife and began to slash across her smiling face in the picture. Fearing he might not channel enough hatred into the sacrifice, he closed his eyes and let the memories flood back. He remembered her voice complaining about his fever, saying she had already made plans to go shopping with friends. She had told him to just drink some water, and then she had the nerve to ask about his gaming account. She had sold it, claiming that men only lose their ambition to such trivial things anyway. She told him she kept the thousands of dollars to buy them food, insisting it was time for him to grow up. She didn't want to suffer with him, claiming they lived in different worlds and demanding he never bother her again. At these thoughts, he suddenly smiled and pulled a lighter from his pocket. After charring a portion of the photo, he placed the sacrifice directly onto the altar. Suddenly, a pillar of purple light rose, its glow a bit more subdued than the red ones we saw earlier. Since the news hadn't mentioned this color before, he couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. We see 5 worn-out tickets materialize, and he quickly snatches them out of the air. Activating his Eye of Truth, a line of text appears, admission tickets for the 4th act of a series. They were epic quality, a single-use consumable, but a powerful one at that. When used, they could forcibly drag out a person's deepest fears or most painful memories. It would cause a mental breakdown for 3 seconds, an epic-grade item, just as he had hoped. While not quite as grand as that dragon egg, a 3-second stun is nothing to scoff at. It was enough to decide life or death in a fight, and it seemed to be part of a larger set. He wondered what would happen if he collected the other acts, but there was no time for that now. With only half an hour left until midnight, he continued his search through the industrial zone. Soon, he discovered another altar, this one bearing the number 7591. It linked to the crossroads of the Lost Web, where a stranded explorer was desperate for directions. He shook his head and turned away. That was one request he simply couldn't fulfill. To be honest, who could? After walking a bit further, yet another altar managed to catch his eye. This was altar number 1988, which connected directly to the silent library. There, an elderly librarian waited, longing to hear just one word of sincere praise. He considered it for a moment, but remembering the bitter life he'd led, he decided to move on. He remained determined to maximize his gains, and so, after wandering through the industrial zone for quite some time, we see him finally discover a massive workshop where a single altar stood eerily in the center. The altar was numbered 101010, a detail that, at first glance, didn't seem particularly noteworthy to him. But he soon realized something was off. The number was actually binary code, and a line of text began to surface. It connected to the logical origin point of a super AI that was on the verge of developing self-awareness. This AI was a master of complex deductions, yet it remained utterly baffled by a single, persistent paradox. It couldn't understand why intelligent beings would waste time thinking about questions that had absolutely no meaning for survival. The AI longed for a sample of this useless wisdom, and he decided right then and there that this was the one. From his backpack, he pulled out a specific book titled The Philosophy of Being and Nothingness. It was a perfect match for the request. However, the moment he placed it on the altar, a sharp, piercing noise rang out. The sound seemed to tear through the air, followed by the acrid stench of burning electronic components, making him stumble. He couldn't help but wonder, had he actually managed to fry the AI's CPU with a bit of philosophy? Suddenly, a pillar of golden light erupted toward the ceiling, bathing the entire workshop in a brilliant glow. His heart began to race. After all, who could have imagined that in just a few short hours, he would successfully collect red, purple, and gold lights, colors that hadn't even been mentioned on the internet yet. But then, without warning, a lethal chill swept toward him from behind. The tip of a blade was inches from sinking into his back, but in the very next second, the attacker's body suddenly froze in place, followed immediately by a guttural scream of pure agony. We see the assassin's dagger clatter to the floor as he clutches his head in desperate pain. It turns out that even before he could consciously react, he had instinctively used that 4th act admission ticket. The ticket forced the attacker to relive his most painful memories for 3 seconds, giving him just enough time to draw the fruit knife from his belt. With a swift, decisive strike, he finished the job, but immediately after, he leaned against the wall as his body began to shake uncontrollably. It was, after all, the first time he had ever taken a life. Staring at the lifeless body, he quickly turned his head away in a daze. He emptied the contents of his stomach right there on the floor, and only after a long moment did he force himself to stand back up. It seemed that while high-level light beams represented great opportunity, they were also a death sentence for the unwary. They acted as beacons for those lurking in the shadows, and we see that, almost immediately, 2 dim white orbs began to float above the corpse. Activating the Eye of Truth, he identified the first item as light leggings. They were of common quality, designed to slightly increase movement speed and jumping power. Crucially, the item was now in an unowned state. To be honest, the implications of that single word were chilling. He then turned his attention to the second item, a low-grade stamina charm. Also of common quality, it provided a small boost to physical endurance. Seeing the status, unowned, once again caused a realization to click into place within his mind like a heavy gear. A cruel, unspoken rule of this new world was surfacing, kill and loot. By eliminating an opponent, one could claim their hard-earned treasures. The fact that this attacker had two practical items suggested he had likely preyed on others before, which, naturally, made him a predator. But he wondered why the internet was flooded with reports about the colorful lights, yet not a single post mentioned this lethal risk. The more he thought about it, the more terrifying the silence became. Deep down, he knew this wasn't an oversight. It wasn't that no one knew. It was that everyone who did know had chosen to remain absolutely silent. Some were like the corpse on the floor, others were busy playing the role of the hunter, and the rest were simply too afraid to speak. Even the authorities likely stayed quiet, because to announce this would be to admit that the existing social order had utterly collapsed. The law of the dark forest was taking over, where every survivor is a potential threat to every other. The entire world was spiraling toward a chaotic new reality, and realizing this, he knew he couldn't afford to waste another second. After quickly stowing the white light orbs, he turned his gaze back to the center of the altar to see what he had truly won. There, he found a metallic cube the size of a fist, and we see him immediately activate the Eye of Truth. It was a dimensional warehouse of legendary quality, providing a massive 1,000 cubic meter space once bound to its owner. With just a simple thought, he could now store or retrieve any altar-related items at a moment's notice. To be honest, finding a legendary grade item that functioned as a logistics tool was an incredible stroke of luck. He immediately thought of the magic dragon egg still sitting back at home, realizing that putting it in this space would undoubtedly be the safest option. The very moment his fingers brushed against the cube, a vast, empty void opened up within his consciousness, and with a quick flick of his mind, he tossed the ticket for the fourth act inside as well. Having finished this, he checked his phone. It was just past midnight. He tucked away the blood-stained fruit knife, ready to leave this dangerous place behind. However, just as he stepped out of the cool mist, a massive bolt of lightning suddenly tore through the sky. Heavy droplets followed immediately as a torrential downpour began, despite the sky being clear and starry just moments ago. He wondered how such a storm could arrive so suddenly. This rain, as it turned out, was far from normal. He stayed exactly where he was, not daring to make a move. Even though he had an umbrella in his bag, he had no way of knowing if the rain itself was dangerous. After all, if altars could fall from the sky, the idea of rainwater causing mutations didn't seem so far-fetched. He pulled out his phone to investigate. Sure enough, news about the rain was already flooding the forums, replacing the previous discussions about trap items. Now, every user was asking the same thing. Is it raining where you guys are too, brothers? Others warned that the rain was definitely suspicious, telling everyone to stay dry or risk turning into a mutant. One panicked user wrote that he'd been caught in it, begging not to be turned into a zombie before even holding a girl's hand. As the post refreshed at a dizzying speed, his heart began to sink. If this rain truly carried an infection, the consequences would be truly unthinkable. But before he could even begin to devise a countermeasure, a new post suddenly flared up in bright red, making his heart skip a beat. Something big had happened. The altar was gone. After he had collected the rare red gold rewards, items never even mentioned in the news, his first instinct was to head straight home as quickly as possible. He hadn't expected the clear, moonlit sky to suddenly give way to such a violent, torrential downpour. Checking his phone again, we see that the forums were now overflowing with frantic messages about the rain. The refresh rate was dizzying, but the news that worried him most wasn't actually about the water itself. It was that red-hot post. The altar is gone. He spun around instantly to check for himself. Sure enough, the altar behind him had completely vanished. At the same time, he noticed something even more chilling. The corpse from earlier was also gone, despite him being absolutely certain that no one else had entered the area. The only explanation was the rain. Its arrival seemingly signaled the disappearance of the altars. It also served to wash away every trace of the previous day's events, and with global surveillance already down, this created the perfect environment for chaos and crime. Realizing the rain wasn't an immediate biological threat, he quickly pulled out his umbrella and hurried toward home. Not long after he departed, the Bureau of Abnormal Affairs arrived on the scene, and it didn't take them long to locate the site. Standing in the workshop where the altar had just been, the team leader, Chin Feng, looked toward the back of the group. A young woman in her 20s stepped forward. After her sacrifice yesterday, she had gained a unique ability. It was called energy retrospection, allowing her to sense the lingering fluctuations of power left behind in a space. The higher the grade of the item, the clearer the traces would be. We see Lin Wan close her eyes to focus. Suddenly, she let out a sharp groan and her body slumped backward, though Chin Feng caught her just in time. What happened? Lin Wan gasped for air, her voice trembling with a visible sense of shock. She explained that this place was vastly different from the blue light scene they had investigated last night. If that sight was like a tiny firefly, she said, then this one was as bright as day, as blinding as the sun itself. One of the team members couldn't help but whisper in disbelief. Could it be a gold-grade trace? Qin Feng's expression immediately turned grave. He ordered the area sealed off for a thorough investigation at once. At the same time, he prepared to report the situation to the higher-ups in the Zitua district. He suspected that a monster beyond their wildest imagination was hiding nearby. Meanwhile, we return to our protagonist as he arrives home. Without wasting a single moment, he placed the demonic dragon egg safely into his dimensional space. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about the egg being discovered. If only the dragon could stay in there after hatching, too. But before he could worry about that, he first had to figure out how to actually hatch the thing. Recalling how it's done in the movies, he decided to try a blood bond, squeezing a single drop onto the shell. Suddenly, a line of small text flickered across the surface. Hatching condition: absorb a sufficient quantity of blood. It was exactly what he had suspected, though he knew his own blood wouldn't be nearly enough for the task. He decided to find a solution tomorrow. After all, his nerves had been stretched to the limit all day. Exhausted, he soon drifted off into a deep sleep. But at 5 o'clock the next morning, a piercing alarm jolted him awake. To his surprise, the altars had actually refreshed and reappeared. He checked the forums on his phone and, after a bit of scrolling, managed to draw a few conclusions. The gray rain from earlier wasn't harmful to the body, and it seemed to stop consistently at 5 in the morning. That was also the moment the altars reset. He headed out to grab some breakfast while pondering his next move. He needed to figure out where to get enough blood. Just as he sat down and ordered noodles, he opened the forums again. However, we see that the forum discussions today are focused on one thing and one thing only: the sacrifices. Many people had already gambled everything away at the altars, but as our protagonist sat eating his noodles, he overheard a conversation between two men nearby. One of them leaned in, speaking in a low, mysterious tone. "Look at those people out there," the man said. "All they can think about is making offerings to the altars. They're throwing away antiques and jade like desperate gamblers, hoping for a miracle. But they've forgotten something very important." His companion looked up, his curiosity clearly piqued. He asked what could possibly be more important than the altars. The answer was simple: people still need to eat. Basic necessities like food and oil will always be in demand, no matter how much the world changes. I'm planning to buy out a small food processing plant while prices are low. When those fanatics run out of money and come crying for a meal, I'll be the food king of Jiangqing. To be honest, it wasn't a bad plan. Hearing this, a realization struck our protagonist like a bolt of lightning. Food processing involves meat, doesn't it? And where does that meat come from? The answer, without a doubt, was the slaughterhouse. If he could take over a slaughterhouse, his current problem with the dragon egg would be solved instantly. He hurried back home and opened his laptop to start searching for listings. It was a buyer's market, after all. Because of the chaos caused by the altars, many factories were being sold off. Soon, he locked onto a specific lead. A small slaughterhouse on the western outskirts of the city was for sale, urgent, for personal reasons, at a bargain price. Without a moment's hesitation, he dialed the number and quickly arranged a time to meet with the owner. After hanging up, he checked his bank balance. In the eyes of some, this amount of money was worth very little. It wouldn't even cover a single decent sacrifice at an altar, but for him, it could buy a dragon's nest. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, he arrived at the western outskirts of Jiangqing, where a middle-aged man hurried out to greet him. The man immediately began showing him around the facility, eager to highlight every corner of the plant. He boasted that the slaughter line had just undergone expensive maintenance only last month. He pointed toward the cold storage unit, claiming its cooling effect was top of the line and perfectly reliable. But as we see, our protagonist simply scanned the surroundings in silence, his cold demeanor making the owner lose his confidence. The man tentatively threw out an inflated price, but he didn't say a word. He simply shook his head. After a bit of back-and-forth haggling, he finally managed to buy the entire place for just 40% of the original asking price. Once the agreement was signed, the owner handed over the keys and shared a few final details. He provided the phone numbers for nearby livestock farms, solving the supply problem instantly. After that, he began inspecting his new property. A little later, he pushed aside a hidden floor panel, revealing a dilapidated storage room tucked away beneath the facility. Suddenly, his eye of truth sensed a faint ripple of energy. He carefully cleared away the old wooden boards. An altar appeared before his eyes, its surface a deep, unsettling shade of crimson. The faint sound of a beating heart echoed through the room. Suppressing his fear, he activated the eye of truth once more. A sharp pain shot through his eyes as a row of text, burning with blood-red flames, flickered into existence. It was altar number 40, connected to the Crimson Throne, where all things are weighed as mere offerings. The text spoke of a crimson coronation and a special attribute, the eternal altar. This altar would exist forever. It didn't count toward the daily sacrifice limit, meaning the number of offerings he could make here was truly infinite. There was another special attribute called the flesh furnace, which could convert any altar rewards into something else. These sacrifices could be transformed into essence blood, which, once absorbed, would permanently enhance his physical vitality. Deep down, he was stunned. This was the lowest numbered altar he had ever seen, and it was permanent. Even more incredible was the unlimited sacrifice capacity, and the fact that this location was now his own private sanctuary. With this altar acting as a conversion station, all those useless items he might find later could be transformed into essence blood. It was the perfect way to bolster his own vitality, and at this moment, he could no longer resist the urge to test it out. As it happened, he had just the thing, the low-quality physical stamina charm he had received as a reward the previous night. After tossing it in, a glass bottle with an ancient, simple design appeared out of thin air in the center of the altar. It contained half a bottle of dark liquid, and as he activated his Eye of Truth, a line of text flickered into view. The item was indeed essence blood of common quality, capable of slightly increasing his overall physical vitality once absorbed. It was exactly as he had imagined. Without a moment's hesitation, he opened the bottle and drank the contents down. He had expected a foul, metallic taste, the kind one might associate with such a dark concoction, but he was pleasantly surprised. Initially, a wave of heat exploded inside him, and he felt as though every single cell in his body was greedily soaking up the energy. Steam began to rise from his skin as his body temperature soared, a sensation entirely different from using standard items. This was because the power was erupting directly from within his own flesh and blood, strengthening him from the inside out. To test his new strength, he walked over to a hanging side of beef and delivered a simple, straightforward punch. The blow sent over 100 pounds of meat flying into the corner. It was far more terrifying than he had anticipated. Considering he had only absorbed a single bottle of common blood, the dream of achieving physical transcendence seemed well within reach. Suppressing his excitement, he began planning to buy a batch of chickens the next day to help hatch his dragon egg. But for now, his priority was to start collecting all those unwanted rewards that other people considered worthless. Countless people were spending fortunes on sacrifices only to receive items they deemed to be utter garbage. Those discarded items were exactly what he needed. Gambling has its risks, after all, but scavenging for trash has none. That afternoon, he got in touch with a local farm owner, only to be confronted by a rather practical new problem. Buying a large batch of livestock required capital, and he had already spent the last of his savings to purchase the slaughterhouse. Even in this strange new era, we see that money remains the lever that moves the world. And so, he decided his best course of action was to go scavenging for trash to see if he could find any hidden treasures. Now that he possessed the unique Crimson Throne altar, he set out to find a suitable place to use it. He intended to use up his daily sacrifice attempts, but as he reached the vegetable market, something unexpected happened. A shrill, piercing scream erupted from up ahead, where a humanoid monster in tattered monk robes was visible. The creature was mauling a passerby, and he immediately activated his Eye of Truth to identify the abominable, flesh-eating monk. It was a common-tier calamity, a vengeful monk who had been beaten to death after being falsely accused of eating mutton. He realized the creature hated any meat-related offerings. Suddenly, several off-road vehicles screeched to a halt nearby. The doors flew open and several figures jumped out, led by Qin Feng, a team leader from the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs. With a cold and stern expression, Qin Feng issued his orders, and the scene was quickly cordoned off. The onlookers were rapidly evacuated, but our protagonist remained standing just a short distance away. We see Qin Feng turn to the woman behind him, Ling Wan, whose expression was deathly serious. Standing behind the police line, he could hear everything clearly, and the situation became instantly clear to him. He processed the gravity of the moment, realizing exactly what was at stake, as Ling Wan suddenly sensed something. Ling Wan's intuition flared as she looked directly toward him, and for a brief second, their eyes met. In that moment of direct contact, he suppressed his internal shock, maintaining the mask of a curious and frightened citizen. Ling Wan's brow furrowed slightly. She had just felt a strange ripple of energy coming from his direction. However, the sensation was so faint that she couldn't be certain. Perhaps it was just an illusion, she wondered. Just then, the monstrous monk inside the market let out a deafening roar that shattered the brief silence. Qin Feng ordered his team to open fire, but to their surprise, the monk seemed completely unfazed by conventional weapons. Seeing the weapons fail, Qin Feng immediately signaled for backup, ordering the second team to move in at once. Two figures shot forward from both sides, while Qin Feng himself seized the opening to join the fray personally. His long blade was instantly wreathed in blinding electrical sparks, and with a single strike, he severed the monk's head. Watching from the shadows, he felt a surge of genuine shock at their flawless, wordless coordination. He realized the gap between his current strength and theirs was vast. He needed to find his own battlefield quickly. As he passed through a cluster of abandoned, half-finished buildings, he sensed a distinct and unsettling presence nearby. It was a place hidden from the eyes of ordinary people, a corner of the world that felt strangely distorted. The air grew heavy, as if something were actively trying to block his path and turn him away. But he pressed on, guided by a singular focus that separated him from the rest of the world. He moved deeper into the district, searching for something that didn't belong in this reality. Following a faint ripple of energy that most would have missed, he climbed the stairs to the second floor. There, an oddly shaped altar revealed itself. Altar number 1955, standing silent in the dust. It connected to the eternal clock city, the domain of a master horologist who sought absolute, flawless precision. The god had created a clock so perfect that he had fallen into a state of endless, suffocating boredom. The deity craved change, leading our protagonist to think that this was simply a case of having too much time on one's hands. Though the low serial number suggested high-tier rewards, time itself is something one can neither see nor touch. He couldn't imagine a sacrifice that would satisfy such a being, so he decided to leave and find another altar. Continuing deeper into the outskirts, he soon discovered a mysterious altar woven entirely from thick, shimmering spider silk. This was altar number 37112, a direct link to the chaotic depths of the demon's nest. It belonged to a demon mother who had lost her voice, while her children wept every night, haunted by nightmares. She wished to sing the demon pearl lullaby once more to soothe her children, but the requirements were enough to make his head spin. He couldn't even hum a human lullaby from start to finish, let alone a complex melody from the demon's nest. With a sigh, he turned away. Being rejected by 2 altars in a row was starting to make him feel a bit anxious. Just as he was about to give up on this area entirely, a faint, flickering light at a bus stop caught his eye. He walked quickly toward the glow, only to find a strange altar constructed entirely out of tiny wooden matches. Simply standing near it, he felt overwhelmed by a wave of profound sadness, prompting him to immediately activate the words of truth. This was altar number 2333, connected to a lonely street corner buried under a heavy, endless snowfall. There lived a little match girl, consumed by a confusion and sorrow she had never known before because she couldn't understand one thing. She wondered why the people passing by no longer had any need for the matches she held. To be honest, the description left him in disbelief. This familiar backstory and the heavy, tragic atmosphere, it was exactly like the tale of the little match girl. It seemed even fairy tales had become their own dimensions, but shock aside, he realized this altar might actually be his best chance. After a moment of thought, he pulled out the lighter he had recently bought and placed it atop the altar of matches. Times were changing, and he figured she couldn't sell matches if she didn't keep up with the trends. No sooner had he spoken than a low, resonant hum vibrated from deep within the altar, followed by a sudden, brilliant beam of purple light. It was finally happening. He watched the altar with bated breath, waiting to see what kind of reward would manifest. There, floating where the light had been, was a small, palm-sized matchbox. Well, that was certainly unexpected. His mind was filled with questions, but he still stepped forward quickly to snatch the item out of the air. An uneasy feeling washed over him as the name appeared. The Matchbox of Hope, an epic tier item that refreshed every day at 5 in the morning. It would automatically generate 5 matches of hope. He fell silent after reading the description. An epic item. And all it gave him were 5 measly matches? Still, hoping for the best, he decided to take them all out to see for himself. As he held them, we see the matches of hope. Despite their ordinary quality, they burned with an incredibly warm and bright flame. They were nearly impossible to extinguish by wind or water and could even deal extra burning damage to calamity-type targets. The ability to harm calamities was certainly interesting. He figured they might actually come in handy if he encountered those blacklight monsters. However, with only 5 matches available, the item still felt a bit underwhelming. To be honest, it was barely a consolation prize. Just as he was about to tuck the matchbox into his dimensional warehouse, a sudden bolt of inspiration flashed through his mind. The matches themselves were only common tier. If he offered them all to the Star Red Throne, what would happen then? He realized he could essentially get 5 bottles of primal blood every single day for free. At that thought, he could no longer suppress the feverish excitement building inside him. He had to verify this theory immediately. Without wasting a single second, he turned and sprinted toward the slaughterhouse, arriving back there just 20 minutes later. Without wasting a second, he stepped before the Star Red Throne and placed a single match in the center of the altar. He watched the altar with bated breath, and a second later, a familiar scene began to unfold before our eyes. A small, dark red vial condensed out of thin air. It was indeed primal blood. It worked, and his heart surged with joy. The combination of the Hope Matchbox and the Star Red Throne was practically a bug in the system. There was no risk involved. Yet it promised a continuous, terrifyingly high return. After offering up all the remaining matches, he finally had 5 bottles of primal blood in his possession. As he drank them all, he felt his blood boil and his body grow hot. A few minutes later, he finally adapted to this new surge of power and checked his phone, which, naturally, showed time was running out. There were only 2 hours left before the day ended, and he couldn't afford to waste his final 2 sacrifice opportunities. The Eternal Clock altar surfaced in his mind again. Its low serial number and time-based attributes were hard to ignore. Its rewards were bound to be powerful, but he wondered what he could possibly use as a sacrifice. He looked around the room, and his gaze settled on an old desk clock. It was something his father had brought home from the company years ago. He had never been able to bring himself to throw it away. The desk calendar was covered in all sorts of handwritten marks. The most prominent was a heavy black circle on June 7th, the day his parents had died in that tragic car accident. It was also the day he visited them every year. As he continued flipping through the pages, he saw September 15th, the day he and Xia Weiwei started dating, and December 24th, her birthday. There were many other notes too: paydays, credit card due dates, classmates' weddings, and even the rent deadline. These marks, some good and some bad, etched out a timeline that belonged entirely to him. At that moment, his thoughts regarding the Clockwork Group became clearer. The time they created was technically perfect. It was precise, without a single deviation, which meant it held no surprises and no accidents. It felt like a dead world, but this desk calendar was different. It carried the messy trajectory of a real human life. The time within it was complex and chaotic, full of uncertainty, and that made this kind of time truly alive. He realized that the altar didn't need more advanced technology. It needed a different experience of time altogether. With this realization, he headed straight for the clock altar. When we see him stand before it once again, he took out the calendar and placed it solemnly in the center. Perfect time has no vitality, he mused. But time filled with regrets and the records of an imperfect life is alive. He wondered if the altar would appreciate the change. The moment he spoke, the calendar vanished from the altar, and time itself seemed to freeze in place. The surroundings fell into a heavy silence until, suddenly, a brilliant golden light and a fierce flame erupted. The entire abandoned building was illuminated as if it were broad daylight, and countless fragments of life appeared like a spinning lantern. They flashed before his eyes at high speed, while an ancient-looking pocket watch materialized in the center of the altar. He quickly activated his Eye of Truth. It was the Pocket Watch of Fate, a legendary tier item with a powerful passive ability. It granted him an incredibly sharp intuition regarding any changes that were about to happen in his immediate surroundings. It granted its holder reaction and judgment times that far exceeded those of any ordinary human being. In that moment, he realized just how foolish he had been. This watch didn't offer mere physical strength or speed. Instead, it provided the precision and awareness needed to perfectly channel his already extraordinary vitality and power. To be safe, he quickly tucked the Pocket Watch of Fate into his subdimensional warehouse, only to discover something surprising. His resonance with the world didn't weaken, the effect remained active. If he encountered another ambush, he was ready. He could now calmly counterattack without even revealing his hidden trump cards. He then checked the time once more. It was 10:40 p.m. With only an hour until the altar refreshed, he had one last chance to set a trap. One path led to the swamp of the giant glyphs, while the other connected directly to the cycling paradise. Suddenly, the faint sound of shouting drifted from the distance. He grew alert, realizing he wasn't alone here. We see him move stealthily toward an open storage yard, where two groups of people were locked in a tense standoff. Right beside them stood an altar shaped like a protective charm, emitting a soft, shimmering pink light. His heart began to race. One look at its appearance told him this was no ordinary find. It was altar number 9269. It served as a beacon to the palace of ultimate bliss, the domain of a battle-hardened and formidable ruler. The succubus queen, bored by ordinary pleasures, craved a physiological stimulus that could truly shock her very soul. He took a sharp breath at the description. The altar's rank was high, which was promising, to say the least. However, the nature of the request seemed a bit unconventional. To be honest, it was borderline scandalous. But as he instinctively checked his backpack, he remembered a specific item he had tucked away earlier. It seemed he had exactly what was needed for this particular job, a perfect match for such a specialized request. He realized that his collection of oddities might finally serve a very specific, if somewhat unusual, purpose. Just then, the situation on the field shifted as one side, led by a bald man in heavy gold chains, stepped forward. Behind him followed a dozen thugs, while the opposing side consisted of only 4 people. Their leader was a tall woman with a striking figure, watching as the bald thug stepped forward with a sneer. However, the girl remained completely unmoved, coldly uttering a single word: "Get lost." In an instant, the bald man's face twisted with rage and humiliation, as the dozen thugs let out strange cries and charged forward. The girl's small group of 4 immediately shifted into a tight defensive formation. The girl lunged into the crowd with her dagger, though it was clear the others lacked her level of skill. One brawny man swung a steel pipe with ferocious strength, while the other 2 focused their attacks on the thugs' lower bodies. Seeing his men being forced back, the bald leader let out a furious roar of frustration. He delivered a full-force kick to the brawny man, sending him flying several meters away with blood streaming from his head. His direct intervention shattered the balance of the fight, and the situation took a sudden turn for the worse. The woman's companions were cut down one after another, and it wasn't long before the tide completely turned. The bald man eventually cornered the girl against a shipping container, but she refused to surrender. Instead, a flash of ruthless determination crossed her eyes. The bald man sensed something was wrong and tried to retreat. But it was too late. The girl crushed a fleshy orb in her hand, and a thick black mist instantly engulfed the area. From within the darkness, a monstrous creature over 3 meters tall slowly emerged. The thugs were paralyzed with fear, but they had no idea that an even more horrific scene was about to unfold. The moment the monster appeared, it turned and immediately tore the nearest brawny man in half. The bald leader watched in absolute terror, realizing that this woman was a complete lunatic. She was willing to kill even her own people, and the remaining thugs scattered in a desperate attempt to escape. But the monster had already begun a one-sided slaughter, and as we watch from the sidelines, the sheer brutality is enough to make anyone's heart race. This girl was truly ruthless. To secure her own escape, she was perfectly willing to drag everyone else straight to hell with her. She was, for all intents and purposes, a walking time bomb, and within moments, the bald thug was the only one left standing. He tried desperately to flee for his life, but the creature simply leaped through the air, pinning him instantly beneath its massive weight. A few minutes later, the clearing had been transformed into a literal purgatory, littered with the corpses of both the thugs and the girl's own companions. Even after its feast, the monster didn't vanish. Instead, it continued to prowl the area, searching for its next target. Meanwhile, the woman who had summoned it was hiding behind a pillar, hardly daring to breathe for fear of being noticed. Our protagonist frowned as he checked the time. It was 11:50 p.m., and he knew he couldn't afford to wait any longer. If he didn't act now, his final chance for the day would be wasted. So he took a deep breath and activated his blood-soaked state. With a surge of power, he charged directly toward that frantic woman, determined to end her life right then and there. From behind her pillar, the woman sensed the danger immediately, yet she chose not to run. Instead, she gripped her dagger and launched a fierce counterattack, aiming for his heart from a dangerously sharp angle. In the past, such a strike would have been nearly impossible to dodge, but now, bolstered by the blood essence and his pocket watch, her attack trajectory seemed almost laughably clear to him. He could even predict her next move before he had finished dodging. He shifted his body slightly to evade the blade, and before she could even think of a follow-up, he slashed her arm open. With another swift strike, he disabled her other hand. Her combat effectiveness was gone in an instant, and she began to scream for mercy. However, his gaze remained cold and devoid of even a shred of pity for her. He drove his blade toward her throat with a strike that, under any normal circumstances, would have been impossible to avoid. Yet, just as the edge was about to touch her skin, the woman let out a piercing shriek and suddenly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. His blade passed through nothing but air, and as the mist began to dissipate, we see that she had vanished entirely. The woman had vanished without a trace, leaving our protagonist standing there in utter shock. He had assumed he could take her down tonight, but it seemed the depths of this world were far more dangerous than he imagined. Such a life-saving technique was unheard of, though he doubted she would dare return anytime soon. But then, the silence broke. A roar mixed with the whistling wind snapped him back to reality as the dark monster finally locked its sights on him. Just as those massive claws were about to tear into him, he stepped back slightly, narrowly evading the strike. Capitalizing on the moment the monster's attack missed, he used his fruit knife to carve a deep gash into its leg. The creature howled in pain and launched a counterattack, but to his eyes, its movements felt like they were in slow motion. The predictive power of the pocket watch of fate was truly formidable. After only a few exchanges, the tide had turned. He used his superior agility and speed to leave the beast covered in wounds, yet its fatal weakness remained elusive. While continuing to maneuver, he activated the Eye of Truth and spotted a faint red glow flickering at the back of the monster's head. He intentionally stumbled to create an opening, baiting the creature into thinking it had a chance to strike as it lunged to bite him. He used his light leggings to leap high into the air, driving his blade into the back of its skull with every ounce of his strength. The massive body collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud, allowing him to finally let out a long, relieved sigh. Knowing he couldn't afford to waste a second, he quickly retrieved the dragon egg from his dimensional space. As soon as he placed it beside the monster's corpse, the egg seemed to suddenly stir with a life of its own. The pools of blood on the ground vanished at a visible rate, and even the monster's carcass began to wither and dry up. A small line of text appeared on the egg, hatching progress 2%. Deep down, he felt a surge of genuine excitement. This cultivation path was clearly the right choice. Feeling a sense of triumph, he moved the egg to where the two groups had fought. The egg quickly absorbed the remaining blood, and several glowing orbs dropped from the scattered corpses nearby. After a quick glance, he saw nothing of great value, so he simply tossed them all into his dimensional warehouse for later. He planned to exchange everything for primal blood once he returned. It was, by all accounts, a massive harvest. Having finished his work, our protagonist turned his gaze toward the enchanting succubus altar. Was he truly ready for the thrill of the succubus queen? To test the limits of this fire and ice charm, he took out the essential bomb and placed it directly onto the altar. Suddenly, the two protective charms seemed to spring to life, and a brilliant purple light quickly enveloped him. He had assumed that with such an intense level of stimulation, he would surely trigger a red mythical grade summon. To his surprise, it was merely a purple light. It seemed the queen's usual tastes were even more extreme than his own. However, in the next second, things took an unexpected turn as the purple energy refused to dissipate. Instead, it began to coalesce into a human shape upon the altar. As a blurry figure emerged, he instinctively gripped his blade. But to his astonishment, the figure revealed the perfect silhouette of a woman. We see that atop her head, she sported a pair of delicate, small demon horns, while a tail with a heart-shaped tip trailed behind her. The tail swayed gently. This was a living, breathing succubus, and her hazy, wandering eyes soon locked onto his. The sound of her voice left his throat dry, and he felt his blood begin to rush uncontrollably toward a certain direction. Yet, in the midst of this incredibly suggestive atmosphere, a highly discordant humming sound suddenly rang out. The dragon egg nearby began to vibrate violently. Before he could even react, an indescribable and terrifying suction force erupted from the black egg. The newly formed succubus froze, her expression turning to one of pure, mortal terror. That suction force was utterly unreasonable, dragging her toward it instantly. The moment she touched the dragon egg, she was transformed into pure purple energy and swallowed whole. After that, a deathly silence filled the air. He stood there, completely petrified, his mind a total blank. To be honest, who could have predicted that? The dragon egg on the ground seemed to let out a satisfied burp before lazily floating back into his arms. He held it with trembling hands, watching in disbelief as the text on the egg's surface began to skyrocket. The hatching progress had skyrocketed to 41%. It seemed the energy of an epic-grade succubus was incredibly potent. At the same time, we see a purple glow appearing on the dragon egg, now adorned with several small heart-shaped marks. The abyss magic dragon and those heart marks had merged. The egg now rubbed against him quite restlessly. He knew his potential succubus wife wasn't coming back, and he gave the shell a frustrated, resentful little tap. He muttered that it had better hatch into a great beauty to compensate him. Just then, lightning flashed across the sky. As the gray rain began to fall, he ducked under a nearby eave. All traces of the previous battle quickly vanished. After that, he began to review the fight. The fact that the woman had escaped left him feeling rather annoyed. She was like a venomous snake hiding in the shadows. To be safe, he decided to enter a small 3-story building. He wanted to see if he could catch her in a counterattack and thoroughly eliminate this hidden threat once and for all. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Dragon Kingdom's Abnormal Affairs Bureau, a researcher in a white coat burst inside. "General, good news. We have finally cracked the secret of the Gray Rain." General Lee looked up in utter disbelief and told him to elaborate. Professor Zhou took a deep, steadying breath. "Our analysis of the unknown sparks within the rainwater shows they are harmless to the human body. However, they can cause supernatural powers to temporarily fail." General Lee froze, completely stunned by the revelation. In the command center, every high-ranking official present wore a look of absolute, stunned incredulity. Professor Zhou continued excitedly, explaining that this effect would last until the gray rain had completely evaporated. Only then would their abilities return. This meant that between midnight and 5 in the morning, those self-important, powerful awakened would be affected. As long as they touched the rain, they would be stripped of their powers and turned back into ordinary people. A sharp light gleamed in General Lee's eyes. If that were truly the case, they could use the rainy night to capture any awakened who had spiraled out of control. Professor Zhou quickly added another crucial detail. This rainwater was impossible to store in its natural state. However, if they could somehow extract the active substances hidden within the droplets, they could create powerful inhibitors or high-pressure water cannons, a weapon of unparalleled strategic value. We returned to the abandoned building, where he was scrolling through a forum while waiting for that woman. Suddenly, a post flashed across his screen with a shocking warning. "Whatever you do, don't go out in the rain." It claimed you would turn back into a mortal, but when he instinctively clicked it, the post had already been deleted. He realized immediately that this was likely a deliberate cover-up. If the news was true, it changed everything. It meant that in the rain, that madwoman wouldn't be able to turn into blood mist to escape him anymore. But then, a wave of unease washed over him. If he became a mere mortal, how could he possibly hunt anyone? Suddenly, he remembered the primordial blood he had obtained from the Crimson Throne, which was described as permanently solidified. This meant it wasn't a temporary buff or a piece of equipment, but a fundamental part of his own physical power. Even if the rain could strip a man of his armor, it certainly couldn't dissolve his very muscles, or so he hoped. Furthermore, the warehouse at the end of the alley was an independent space, likely safe from any contamination. His divine perception wouldn't be affected either, while others were weakened into helpless weaklings under the gray rain. His own power would remain almost entirely intact. In that moment, he realized he could become the only god of the rainy night. His heart began to race at the sheer possibility. He needed to verify this theory, and he needed to do it immediately. Standing out in the gray rain that everyone else feared, he found the grin on his face nearly impossible to suppress. The water could reset almost any supernatural ability, yet it failed to touch the physical reinforcement of his primordial blood. While every other awakened was being reduced to an ordinary human, he remained the undisputed master of the storm. Meanwhile, the woman who had witnessed his terrifying power had just used her blood shield to retreat to her villa. Several men in black suits panicked the moment they saw her state, and a butler came scurrying over in a hurry. We see that Yin Ruoshue's eyes were filled with a deep, lingering fear. She immediately ordered the butler to find an artist, desperate to have your likeness drawn as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, as soon as he returned to the slaughterhouse, he tossed the white items he'd collected into the Crimson Throne. Since these items would lose their power in the Grey Rain anyway, he decided to turn them all into primordial blood. After drinking all 4 bottles of the blood he'd obtained, he went back inside and fell into a deep sleep. He woke up promptly at 5 in the morning, having already coordinated with the farm owner the night before. The first batch of chickens arrived early, and he transformed into a heartless machine to begin the processing. By the time all 500 chickens were consumed, the dragon eggs hatching progress had reached 42.3%. It turns out 500 chickens only provided a 1.3% increase, a rather poor return on investment, to be honest. And so, he decided to change his strategy, letting the altar's power disrupt this traditional industry. The farm owner was already feeling anxious due to the increasing difficulty of processing the livestock. His plan was simple: turn the livestock into semi-finished products quickly and let the owners find their own sales channels. He called the farm owner and explained his idea directly. Naturally, they were both in complete agreement. That afternoon, Boss Wong delivered another 500 chickens and even offered to bring in birds from his competitors. He knew the man wanted to act as a middleman to pocket the price difference, but until the egg hatched, he didn't mind. In fact, he hoped the man would provide even more livestock, and once Boss Wong left, the flesh mill resumed its work. This time, he didn't chase pure efficiency like he did in the morning, choosing instead to control the angle and force of every strike. This was a unique form of cultivation, and he could feel himself becoming one with the blade through this repetitive labor. His control over his own strength grew more sophisticated by the hour, and as night fell, the egg's progress continued to climb. The progress reached 43.6% as he grabbed his bag and headed out, knowing the night was the perfect time for sacrifices. On the other side of the city, we see Xiao Weiwei and her boyfriend, Zhang Yang, arriving at the Nightfall Bar. The pair tracked down a man calling himself Brother Long, and, after paying a hefty $50,000 introduction fee, Brother Long provided them with a mysterious location, which Xiao Weiwei and Zhang Yang immediately drove toward. As they traveled, Zhang Yang could hardly contain his excitement, his mind racing with the possibilities. A flicker of anticipation crossed Xiao Weiwei's eyes as she thought of that useless man she'd left behind. She imagined him eating scraps somewhere, still bitter that he'd actually had the nerve to block her. He hadn't even sent a single message in days, which, naturally, she found insulting. Meanwhile, we return to our protagonist. He let out a sneeze while searching for the altar, having just endured a moment of absolute darkness in his luck. He had only managed to pull a blue-quality item from the altar, the Windrunner boots. While these boots could significantly increase his movement speed, they would unfortunately become useless in the rainy night. He decided it would be better to offer them to the Crimson Throne later to see what quality of primordial blood he could get. Around 11 at night, he noticed something glowing by the river, and as he drew closer, he made a discovery. Imagine his surprise when he found an altar where the left and right sides were completely different. On the left side of the altar stood a fire phoenix, radiating a brilliant, intense red light. On the right side stood a dim, lusterless heavy pool, prompting him to quickly activate his Eye of Truth. He realized that the two altars were actually linked together, maintained by a faint, flickering thread of energy between them. He hadn't expected to find something like a twin altar, and the more he looked, the more startled he became. It turns out both altars had quite the reputation, with the Fire Phoenix altar being designated as number 7766. It was connected to the Nine Heavens immortal realm, where the favored daughter, Nalan Ranran, was currently feeling quite distressed. 3 years ago, her fiancé Xiao Huahua saw his cultivation regress, leading the family elders to pressure her into breaking the engagement. She stood at a crossroads, unsure of where to turn, while the altar on the right was equally extraordinary. This altar, numbered 6677, served as a beacon connected to the Nine Heavens immortal realm. There, the genius youth Xiao Huahua found his progress mysteriously stalled, leaving him in a state of quiet desperation. He had fallen from grace, becoming a pariah that everyone despised, and though he longed to break free, no one would help him. Upon seeing the information, our protagonist's heart began to race. It was actually Nalan Ranran and Xiao Huahua. He was far too familiar with how this story was supposed to go, and now, he was the one pulling the strings. He wondered what the best move was. If Nalan Ranran didn't break the engagement, things might not proceed as planned. Xiao Huahua might never activate his hidden power in such a desperate situation, and our hero would receive no rewards. Therefore, he had to follow the plot and fan the flames at the critical moment, even if Nalan Ranran wasn't truly heartless. Deep down, she was being coerced by her family into the idea of ending the betrothal. He decided to make this rejection even more intense, knowing that pushing Xiao Huahua to the brink would maximize his own rewards. Quickly, he took out a pen and paper to stir the pot, writing that a phoenix should not associate with mere sparrows. He noted that the path of cultivation is full of obstacles, and the boy simply could no longer keep up with her pace. To reach the peak, one must first cut ties with the past. He then placed the note into the phoenix altar. Instantly, the altar emitted a soft suction, making the paper vanish as a shimmering projection suddenly appeared above it. We see Nalan Ranran trembling with emotion, her hand tightly clutching the token of her engagement to Xiaohuahua. Outside the door, the cold, impatient voices of the family elders urged her not to remain stubborn. The ancestors had already decided that the Xiao family was no longer worthy of an alliance with the Nalan clan. She grit her teeth in frustration, and at that exact moment, a single red feather flew in through the window. The feather transformed into a sheet of paper in her hand, and as she read the contents, her entire body trembled while she whispered to herself, "How could a phoenix ever associate with mere sparrows?" In that moment, the confusion in her eyes vanished completely. The phoenix bloodline within her began to boil, and without a second thought, she crushed the jade engagement pendant in her palm. She turned and headed for the Xiao family with the great elder, and as they left, the light above the altar finally faded away. Our protagonist had successfully become the mastermind behind the broken engagement, yet strangely, the altar's reward had not yet appeared. He wondered if he had to wait for both sides to reach a conclusion, so he turned his attention toward the other altar. Once again, he took up his pen and wrote, "A fallen tiger does not bend its back, it only waits for the wind to rise. 30 years east, 30 years west. Never look down on a youth just because he is currently poor." After finishing, he felt a surge of adrenaline rush to his head, and he slapped the note firmly onto the altar. With a loud boom, the light of karma this time was even more violent and intense than the one before. We see the atmosphere in the Xiao family hall grow incredibly heavy as Nalan Ranran stands there with an icy expression. Even the elder behind her wore a look of utter disdain as he announced that the Nalan family had made their final decision. They were here to end the engagement today, mocking the idea of a lowly toad trying to feast on swan meat. He told them not to delay their saintess's bright future, and the room filled with the cruel sound of the crowd's laughter. Xiaohuahua clenched his fists tightly as a wave of boundless humiliation washed over his heart. He looked at the determined Nalan Ranran and declared that if this was her wish, then he would be the one to divorce her today. He vowed they would never cross paths again, and later, we find Xiaohuahua roaring at the sky in the back mountains. Just as he was on the verge of a total breakdown, a slip of paper carrying our heroes will drifted down from above. It landed directly on his face, leaving him stunned as he reached up to unfold the mysterious message. The bold, dramatic words met his eyes. 30 years east, 30 years west. Never look down on a youth for being poor. We see Xiaohuahua's body tremble violently as the dying embers within his heart suddenly erupt into a fierce blaze. He told himself that his fate belonged to him alone, and that he, Xiaohuahua, would never sink into despair. Just as this intense conviction reached its absolute peak, the black ring on his right hand began to change. It emitted a brilliant light as an ancient aura, asleep for eons, finally awakened and whispered, "Little fellow, you have suffered these past years." At that moment, the light outside the altar exploded completely. A surge of energy spanning across time and space followed. He hadn't expected the feedback to be quite this earth-shattering. He wondered what quality of reward this could possibly be, staring intently as the phoenix altar on the left reacted. A pillar of black light shot toward the sky, and instantly, a terrifying aura erupted from within it. It was a power that contained nothing but extreme anger and deep-seated resentment. Right then, the target altar on the right also burst forth with a massive pillar of energy. A dazzling red light instantly illuminated the entire sky, causing him to pause in his tracks at the sight. Looking at the feedback from both altars, his scalp went numb. One was emitting a sky-piercing black light, while the other glowed with a red light that could drive anyone to madness. He decided, right then, not to run. He turned and dashed toward the target altar, reaching out to grab the item appearing within the red glow. It was a dagger radiating a dark, sinister mist. Simultaneously, the ground beneath his feet began to shake violently. A figure suddenly emerged from the black light of the altar, his face bearing a 70% resemblance to Nalan Ranran. However, his expression was one of utter madness, and his voice was filled to the brim with resentment. He quickly activated the Eye of Truth, revealing the creature to be Nalan Ranran's inner demon wraith, an epic tier entity. It was a calamity-class manifestation of twisted karma, sharing Nalan Ranran's bloodline, but possessed by a paranoid, frenzied nature. He immediately tried to make a run for it, but the vengeful entity began to chase him down without hesitation. A massive force suddenly slammed into his chest, and despite having a body as tough as diamond, he was sent flying, coughing up a mouthful of blood as a sense of sheer dread filled his heart. The wraith lunged forward, aiming straight for his throat, while his fate pocket watch began to vibrate with a frantic warning. He immediately leaped backward to dodge the strike, then swung his hand to stab back at the vengeful spirit. just as he assumed the dagger would be completely unable to pierce the creature's defenses. It sank into the entity without any resistance whatsoever, causing his eyes to light up with sudden hope. It seemed this dagger was far from ordinary. The wraith shrieked in pain and retreated, no longer daring to stay close. It then hurled a ball of black fire at him, which he narrowly avoided with a desperate roll across the ground. Our hero decided it was time to go on the offensive, realizing that if the blade could break its defense, then killing it wasn't an impossible dream after all. He quickly activated the Eye of Truth once more. We see a flickering purple light deep within the wraith's abdomen, the creature's true weakness. He lunged forward to strike at the spot, but the wraith reacted instantly to block his path. As a clawed hand reached out to grab him, he skillfully shifted the direction of his dagger midair. With a sharp tear, he opened a gash in its stomach, though his own left arm was badly mangled by its claws. The glow in the wraith's abdomen dimmed significantly, and from there, the two of them began a brutal exchange of blows. After managing to deepen the wound on the creature's belly, he was violently swatted away, crashing into the distance. As he struggled to stand, feeling as though his spine might snap, he noticed the light in the wraith was fading fast. The entity pressed its hands together, gathering every ounce of its lingering resentment into a single point. A massive blade of energy formed and swung toward him, but this was the exact opening he had been waiting for. He instantly threw out an admission ticket to the fourth act, and the wraith's giant blade shattered into nothingness. A look of utter confusion and regret washed over the wraith's face as he exploded forward with every ounce of speed he had left. He stabbed at the creature's abdomen again and again, until finally, the massive entity collapsed with a heavy thud. The battle was over, leaving him covered in wounds with a shattered left arm and broken ribs, though even in this state, he didn't forget the dragon egg. After taking it out, he followed the system's guidance to let it feed on the black blood soaking the ground. The hatching progress began to climb steadily, only coming to a halt once it reached a significant 49.6%. At that moment, his Eye of Truth caught a slight anomaly in the air that seemed out of place. We see the lingering resentment in the atmosphere failing to dissipate. Instead, it all began swirling into the black dagger. He realized then that he hadn't actually checked the weapon's attributes yet, so he activated the Eye of Truth once more. The dagger's information appeared before him, the Soul Eater dagger, currently at 97 growth points. It was a growth-type mythic item, capable of devouring souls, resentment, and fear to nourish its own power. The wielder would gain massive resistance to mental pollution, a revelation that brought a genuine spark of joy to his eyes. Being able to resist mental attacks was exactly what he lacked most in his current arsenal. After all, while his origin blood could grant him a body as tough as resin, that wouldn't matter much if his mind was easily broken. Even the strongest defense can be slowly worn down if the user is incapacitated, and this dagger filled that gap perfectly. After resting long enough to regain a bit of strength, he checked his phone. It was 11:45. Dragging his battered body along, he began to limp slowly but surely toward the slaughterhouse. Meanwhile, 3 off-road vehicles were racing toward this very location at high speed. In the passenger seat, Chin Feng looked absolutely livid. To be honest, they had been driven nearly mad over the last 2 days. He hadn't expected the western suburbs to erupt with that crimson light again, and this time, he was determined to find a lead. Beside him, however, Lin Wan's voice trembled slightly as she noted it was already 11:50. If they didn't reach the scene before midnight, every trace of the battle and all energy residues would be completely washed away. When the convoy finally arrived, they were met with a scene of utter devastation and clear signs of a violent struggle on the ground. Nearby lay a twisted, unrecognizable corpse, prompting Chin Feng to immediately order his team to begin gathering clues. At the same time, he directed Lin Wan to use her energy reconstruction ability, and we see her stepping forward with purpose. She pressed her hands together and closed her eyes as a soft blue light began to radiate outward from her palms. Just as the images of the past were about to manifest, her body suddenly jolted, and she coughed up a mouthful of blood. She fainted right then and there, falling backward into the arms of a shocked and worried Chin Feng. Simultaneously, a light pitter-patter of raindrops began to fall as a bolt of lightning streaked across the darkened sky. Midnight had arrived, and with it, the gray rain began its work of washing every remaining clue into oblivion. The altar and the blood on the ground vanished entirely, but fortunately, a team member rushed over with a report. They had managed to collect a few drops of blood, a small victory that left Chin Feng gritting his teeth in frustration. Elsewhere, our protagonist finally made it back to the slaughterhouse, his injuries having turned the journey into a grueling 2-hour trek. The very first thing he did upon his return, surprisingly enough, was sacrifice the Windwalker boots to the Crimson Throne. A brand new bottle appeared in their place, containing origin blood of truly excellent quality. Once absorbed, it would significantly boost his vitality and permanently solidify his strength, a prospect he found quite enticing. With a sense of anticipation, he drank the contents in one gulp, only for his body to suddenly begin trembling violently. He felt a surge of raw power racing through his veins as his bones and wounds began to knit together at a frantic pace. This excellent origin blood was, to be honest, the perfect medicine. Within moments, his deep gashes had already begun to scab over. He then pulled out the black dagger once more, feeling a faint, newfound bond with the weapon after the night's life and death struggle. Starting tomorrow, he would have to continue his work with the chickens, knowing each one would further refine his lethal techniques. The progress of the dragon egg and the growth of the dagger had formed a perfect, self-sustaining loop of power. The next morning, we see that the wounds on his body have almost entirely healed, leaving barely a scar behind. He then took out 5 brand new matches to sacrifice, drinking the 4 bottles of origin blood he received in exchange. After that, he called Boss Wong at the farm, instructing him to deliver every bit of stock he currently had on hand. 1,200 chickens were soon delivered, and he pulled out the soul jade to begin his cultivation. After a full morning of work, the growth progress of the soul jade had reached 197 points. The dragon egg also progressed, finally reaching 54% incubation, and it was at this exact moment that things changed. The dragon egg finally showed signs of life as a small crack spiderwebbed across the surface of the shell. A fluffy tail poked through the opening, and strangely enough, the tip was in a very familiar heart shape. It looked exactly like the tail of the succubus he had devoured, a fitting reward for all his hard work, he supposed. He hoped for a powerful companion. Meanwhile, Enro and her group arrived at a deserted, trash-filled lot. Walking right beside her was Xiao Weiwei, who, through sheer, unbelievable luck, had managed to climb the ranks. She had successfully become a core member of the Black Shadows in the underground city, though she still had her doubts. She asked with a hint of confusion if such a remote place could truly hide the expert they were looking for. Enro turned back and gave her a cold, sharp look, warning her not to let her good luck loosen her tongue. That man was incredibly strong, the kind of person who could crush someone like her with a single finger. Had an informant not reported a red light in this area last night, she wouldn't have dared to risk coming here. From the roof of an unfinished building nearby, a solitary figure silently watched Enro and her companions. Back at the Jiangzhou Abnormal Affairs Bureau, a flicker of joy finally crossed Qin Feng's gloomy face upon hearing the news. They finally had a lead on the person who had obtained the mythical dragon egg and the dagger in Xiangji. In a single morning, he had finished the grim task of slaughtering 1,000 chickens, pushing the progress of the soul jade and the dragon egg significantly forward. In high spirits, he prepared to return to the city to find a suitable opportunity for his next sacrifice. However, just as he stepped onto the bustling pedestrian street, a sharp and desperate scream pierced through the air. We see a middle-aged man clutching an empty box, wailing in utter despair. Standing beside him was a security captain, looking thoroughly annoyed by the scene, as if this were merely a nuisance to his day. The surrounding crowd began to whisper and gossip, and from their chatter, he slowly pieced together what had happened. It turned out the man had sold his house just to buy a jade pendant, staking everything on this one single sacrifice. Unfortunately, the altar had only returned a useless wooden club in exchange. He turned his gaze toward the altar that had caused this tragedy. It was uniquely shaped and shimmering with a golden light. No wonder the man had been willing to gamble his entire life on it. He immediately activated his Eye of Truth, revealing that Altar 17626 was connected to a discarded vault belonging to a goblin. This particular goblin collector was bored with gold and jewels, and instead craved the most advanced technological creations in the world. Seeing this, he couldn't help but grimace. The jade pendant the man had bankrupted himself to buy was worthless to such a creature. Sending a traditional treasure to a goblin who loved technology meant the outcome was, to be honest, doomed from the very start. Just as the security captain signaled his men to drag the man away, an arrogant voice cut through the crowd. Wait, and then, a seductive figure stepped forward. It was none other than Xiao Weiwei herself. She tilted her chin up, clearly enjoying the greedy stares of the crowd, before casting a dismissive glance at the broken man. She told him that if he died now, he would truly have nothing, and asked if he wanted to win back everything he had lost. A spark of hope instantly ignited in the man's eyes as he begged her, promising to do anything she asked. If they wanted a daily sacrifice to gamble with, she told them they should follow her. And then, Xiao Weiwei simply snapped her fingers. Her bodyguards immediately hoisted the middle-aged man up, much to the absolute shock of everyone watching. The crowd was left wondering if this beauty was actually performing an act of charity, as things usually went quite differently in these parts. But as we see this strange reversal of roles, 2 thugs on the edge of the crowd couldn't help but let out a mocking laugh. They whispered that the crowd knew nothing. This wasn't charity. It was a form of captivity for those who had lost everything. While many people lacked the money to offer sacrifices, there were others who had more wealth than they knew what to do with. Unfortunately for the wealthy, the number of times one could personally offer a sacrifice was strictly limited. And that is exactly where these broken, captive souls became useful to those at the top. Every item they obtained through sacrifice had to be handed over immediately, and if they happened to pull something valuable, they would be rewarded with fine food and a taste of the high life. However, if their luck ran dry for too long, they would be discarded once their very last bit of value had been squeezed out of them. It was, quite literally, a human slot machine, and our protagonist heard every word of their chilling explanation. He told himself that the fate of others was none of his business, but just as he turned to leave, a sharp voice rang out from behind him, telling him to wait. He recognized it instantly as Xiao Weiwei. He chose to ignore her and kept walking, only for her to scream, asking if he was deaf and demanding he stop. In an instant, several bodyguards in black suits rushed forward to surround him, forcing him to slowly turn around. He saw Lu Ruyan standing there, her face twisted with a sense of malicious joy. To be honest, she looked far too pleased. Ever since she had joined the Black Shadow, the city's largest underground organization, her luck with sacrifices had made her a rising star. Yet, he remained like a thorn in her side, a man she considered worthless who had actually dared to block and delete her. She hadn't expected him to deliver himself to her doorstep today, and she looked down at him with an arrogant, theatrical air. She mocked him, asking if he had come back because he regretted blocking her, before coldly adding that it was far too late for regrets. The crowd immediately erupted into a flurry of whispers, wondering who this young man was and what his connection to her could be. The whispers grew louder, with some wondering if this was a classic case of a rejected ex-boyfriend trying to punch above his weight. However, at that moment, our protagonist's stomach was growling so loudly that he had absolutely no interest in dealing with Xiao Weiwei. Seeing his complete lack of concern, Xiao Weiwei finally reached her breaking point, her patience snapping in front of everyone. Suddenly, she kicked off her high-heeled shoe and, in a bizarre display, began to pull off her black silk stocking right there in public. She pulled a thick stack of cash from her bag, and the surrounding crowd, sensing a spectacle, began to cheer and egg her on. The chaotic noise of the crowd finally snapped him out of his hunger-induced trance, forcing him to pay attention to the absurdity. He wondered what on earth this woman was rambling about, annoyed that she was delaying his trip to the food stalls. Seeing that he remained unmoved, Xiao Weiwei finally lost it and screamed for him to get on his knees. But just as the words left her mouth, a sharp crack echoed through the air, a sound so loud it instantly silenced the surrounding commotion. Xiao Weiwei's head snapped back as a bright red handprint bloomed across her pale, stunned face. Before she could react, he followed up with a backhand strike so powerful it sent her spinning to the ground. Xiao Weiwei clutched her face in utter disbelief, while her bodyguards, seeing their employer struck, immediately lunged toward him. But after a series of dull thuds, they were sent flying backward, crying out in pain as they hit the pavement. He walked up to the trembling Xiao Weiwei and looked down at her with pure disdain, making it clear she wasn't worth his time. Without another word, he simply walked away, leaving the crowd staring after him in stunned, open-mouthed silence. In the midst of the confusion, a man in the crowd quickly pulled out his phone to make a report. He reported that the target, codenamed Peacock, had just been involved in a violent confrontation on the pedestrian street. It turns out that ever since Yan Ruoxue and Xiao Weiwei appeared at the abandoned site, the Bureau of Abnormal Affairs had been watching. Peacock was the secret code name for Lu Ruyan, and an agent named Xiao had been tasked with monitoring her every move. We watch as the agent continues his report, his eyes fixed on the retreating figure of our protagonist. Inside the Bureau of Abnormal Affairs, Qin Feng listened to the report and simply replied that he was aware of the situation. However, Lin Wan, who had been busy studying the data nearby, suddenly spoke up with a note of uncertainty. She stared at the snapshots sent back from the scene, and though our protagonist's figure was blurry, she felt a flicker of recognition. She felt as if she had seen him somewhere before, causing Qin Feng to instantly stop what he was doing and look over. But no matter how hard Lin Wan tried, she couldn't quite place him. Perhaps, she thought, the recent pressure was simply getting to her. Qin Feng, his eyes flickering as he stared at the screen, ordered 2 agents to investigate Lu Ruyan's ex-boyfriend immediately. Anyone capable of taking down several bodyguards in an instant had clearly gained significant benefits from the altar. Meanwhile, we follow our protagonist as he heads toward a familiar food stall, finding the place exactly as he remembered it. The area was bustling and full of life, so he found an empty seat and ordered a few of his favorite small dishes. It was then that he noticed a middle-aged man in his 40s walking toward his direction through the crowd. The man was clutching a red bag, weaving his way between the tables where people were drinking and eating. Before long, he approached the group of men at the next table who were playing drinking games and politely interrupted them. He told them he had something they should take a look at, a blue light item he had just obtained that very day. A blue light item? The men paused in surprise as the man pulled a blue and white porcelain teacup from his bag. Curious, they took the cup and began examining it one by one, even using a flashlight to inspect it closely for any hidden value. But they couldn't find any practical use for the cup, and a man with a thick beard eventually waved his hand in annoyance. He told the seller to just get to the point. What did it actually do, and how much money did he want for it? The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and held up 3 fingers, admitting that the item's specific use was still unknown. Upon hearing this, the bearded man spat out his drink in shock, asking if the seller had gone mad wanting 30,000. To ask for 30,000 for a broken teacup with no known purpose seemed absurd, but the middle-aged man desperately tried to explain. The poor man was being scolded so harshly, he couldn't even lift his head, while our protagonist watched the entire scene unfold before activating his eye of truth. His gaze fell upon that unremarkable teacup, revealing it to be the cup of serenity, an item of excellent quality capable of containing gray rain. Upon seeing its effects, he caught his breath in surprise. This was, for all intents and purposes, a divine artifact. After all, gray rain has the power to neutralize any supernatural ability, but it is notoriously impossible to store or preserve. However, with this cup, one could simply take the stored gray rain and give it a gentle splash toward an enemy. It could instantly strip a top-tier powerhouse of their abilities, which meant, naturally, that he had to buy it immediately. With that thought in mind, he quickly called out to the middle-aged man, who came jogging over, calling him boss, with desperate hope. The man asked if he wanted to see the item, insisting with a shaky voice that it truly was a genuine blue light tool. At the next table, a man with a thick beard chimed in, warning the young man not to do anything foolish. He claimed the seller was clearly an old con artist, arguing that a real blue light item couldn't be bought for a mere few thousand. Our protagonist simply smiled and nodded, gesturing for the man to take a seat despite the warnings from the other table. He called out to the owner to add 2 drumsticks and a large beef stir-fry, noting that his new guest looked hungry and needed extra meat. The middle-aged man was stunned. Not only was he not being chased away, but he was actually being treated to a warm meal. He looked at the harmless-looking young man and wondered, perhaps a bit cynically, if there was a hidden catch to such kindness. Once the steaming food was served, the man stopped worrying and began to eat ravenously, as if he hadn't had a real meal in days. Only after he finished did our protagonist speak up, confirming he would take the cup and learning the man's name was Zhao Gang. We learned that Zhao Gang was once a senior investment analyst, but his daughter's severe illness had drained every cent of his life savings. Driven to a dead end, he had no choice but to sell the heirloom, and so they headed off together to withdraw the cash. On the way, Zhao Gang clutched the porcelain cup nervously and asked if the young man truly trusted his word. Our protagonist paused his steps for a moment and replied that it wasn't the cup he was choosing to believe in. Rather, he was choosing to believe in the spirit of a father willing to sacrifice everything for his daughter. The most precious thing in this world isn't a treasure, he mused, but the light in one's eyes that hasn't yet gone out. Zhao Gang had endured so much mockery on this journey that these words felt like a sudden, warm ray of sunlight. With a trembling voice, the man vowed to remember this kindness and swore he would find a way to repay it one day. The cash was withdrawn quickly, and when the heavy stack of 30,000 yuan was finally placed in his hands, the man completely broke down. His hands shook as he tried to kneel, but our protagonist caught him firmly by the arms. After exchanging contact information, Zhao Gang disappeared into the crowd, leaving our protagonist to watch his retreating figure. He thought of his Scarlet Throne, which required a massive amount of low-grade items to be sacrificed as fuel. Only then could it continuously convert energy to strengthen his body, meaning he needed a way to acquire items in bulk. He needed someone to buy up the trash items others despised, someone who wouldn't betray him in the short term. Zhao Gang might just be useful for that later. He then checked his phone to see it was 7:40 in the evening. With barely 4 hours left before the gray rain descended, it was time to prepare for the final sacrifice. Suddenly, a commotion erupted in the plaza ahead as people began pointing at the sky, wondering what was happening to the moon. We see the once bright and clear moon now being slowly smothered by an ominous, blood-red layer. Any gamer knows a blood moon signifies curses and cataclysms, a realization that left everyone wondering what was truly going on. At this moment, a heavy sense of unease and oppression began to spread rapidly through the gathering crowd. Every face was stained with an eerie crimson hue. Sensing the shift, he quickly pulled out his phone to check the forums. The boards were flooded with wild theories about the blood moon, with many users fearing that something terrible was about to happen. One post boldly predicted that something massive was coming tonight, while others looked for a silver lining. Some claimed the drop rate for rare items would double during a blood moon, urging the risk-takers to charge ahead. He wondered what the actual impact of this blood moon would be as we see him approaching a nearby altar. It resembled a rusted vending machine, and as the moon's influence grew stranger, he quickly activated his eye of truth. The display identified it as altar number 20247, a beacon connected to the mechanical wasteland. It was essentially a mechanical merchant wandering the wastes, one with a particular fondness for collecting various currencies. The blood moon had boosted the sacrifice count tenfold, prompting a nearby gambler to toss in his very last coin. The coin vanished instantly the moment it hit the altar, consumed by the ancient mechanism. The remaining sacrifice count at the bottom dropped by 1, but then something truly eerie began to happen. The returned item didn't emit the usual glow. Instead, it was coated in a thick, unsettling layer of blood-red grime. Even those standing right next to it couldn't see what was inside, causing his heart to race with sudden excitement. Under the shroud of the blood moon, the number of sacrifices allowed by the altar had become strictly limited. Furthermore, the process no longer revealed the item's quality through light. Only the sacrificer would know what they had received. To him, this was nothing short of a godsend, even here in the middle of a crowded pedestrian street. Even if he pulled 3 legendary red tier items in a row, others would simply assume he had found nothing of value. He knew he had to hurry and find more altars. Before long, he had already completed 2 more sacrifices. The results, however, were somewhat underwhelming, as one of the items turned out to be a common blue-quality sword. While it was sharp enough to cut through iron, he was a man who already possessed a mythic-grade soul weapon. This ordinary blade would serve as nothing more than a light snack for his scarlet throne. The other altar gave him purple-quality pauldrons. Named Beast's Rage, the armor granted an active skill that could trigger a berserk state for a short duration. However, the inevitable period of weakness afterward meant its only real destiny was to be converted into essence blood. He couldn't help but wonder what epic-grade essence blood would taste like as he finally spotted another altar around the corner. We see him activate the Eye of Truth once more, revealing altar number 1050, a beacon connected to the lost Sea of Stars. It belonged to an ancient stargazer lost at the edge of the galaxy, a man whose lifelong pursuit of light had finally flickered out. He yearned to see the light of hope just one more time, and we note that the remaining sacrifice count stood at 7. His first thought was to use the Matches of Hope, but unfortunately, those had already been sacrificed to the Scarlet Throne. Ordinary matches or lighters simply wouldn't do. They lacked the necessary weight of genuine, heartfelt desire. After searching through his pockets, he eventually pulled out a small ATM receipt he had kept from a previous withdrawal. To a man like Zhao Gang, this tiny slip of paper represented the very hope his daughter needed to keep living. It was also proof of a young man's willingness to extend a helping hand to a complete stranger. Perhaps this was the unquenchable light of humanity the altar sought, so he decided to give it a try. He placed the receipt upon the altar, and to his surprise, a long, weary sigh echoed through the air. A plain, 5-pointed star then appeared, which the Eye of Truth identified as the Star of Hope. It was a legendary tier, single-use item that would automatically activate the moment its owner faced death. It possessed the power to reshape the owner's flesh and soul, bringing them back to life in peak condition. His eyes widened in shock as he realized he was holding what was essentially a resurrection coin. This was the ultimate trump card, a treasure whose value was far too high to be measured by common logic. He quickly tucked the Star of Hope into his dimensional space and began picking up his pace to head back. As he scrolled through the online forums on his way home, he noticed something that felt slightly off. A blurry photo was attached to a post, showing an altar that had been reduced to nothing but a pile of rubble. The comments section was in a total frenzy, with users shocked to learn that these altars could actually be destroyed. Someone had been tracking the data and concluded that an altar would break after exactly 10 sacrifices. The logic online was simple: out with the old and in with the new, so why not just destroy all the altars? Perhaps something better would appear in their place, and we see 2 factions of users arguing relentlessly over the idea. The authorities offered no response, seemingly caught off guard by these sudden and chaotic developments. It all suggested the Blood Moon was far from simple, as no one knew if breaking an altar was a blessing or a curse. He knew he had to convert his new gear into raw power, and on his way back, he kept a close eye on his surroundings. He passed several altars that remained completely untouched, their sacrifice counts still sitting at a full 10. It seemed the outskirts were sparsely populated, and as soon as he returned to the slaughterhouse, he took his blue-quality sword. He sacrificed it to the Scarlet Throne, and after drinking a bottle of excellent-grade essence blood, he prepared for more. Next, he pulled out the epic-grade bone blade, and we can almost feel the Scarlet Throne trembling in anticipation. A bottle of purple liquid emerged, epic-grade essence blood, a treasure of immense rarity. Consuming it would massively boost his physical vitality, so he tilted his head back and began his meditation. The epic-grade blood was nothing short of a nuclear explosion, sending terrifying energy blasting through his entire body. His muscles began to swell and restructure themselves with frantic speed, such as the power of an epic tier upgrade. He felt as though a single casual punch could now shatter the very walls of the basement. He checked his phone to see it was 11:59 p.m., then began scrolling through live streams to pass the time. He wanted to see if midnight would bring any new changes, and we find ourselves watching a specific broadcast. A man stood before a gourmet altar made of various dishes, complaining that he had expected a feast of lobsters. Instead, after the blood moon arrived, the altar simply remained there without providing any immediate reward. The man pulled out an item, intending to make a sacrifice to see what would happen next. To his utter shock, the altar suddenly began to tremble violently. A massive monster covered in writhing tentacles crawled out from within the altar in an instant. A giant, bloody maw suddenly filled the entire screen, and then the live broadcast went pitch black. The sound of bone-chilling chewing echoed from the darkness, and the comments section exploded with panic. Not long after, a blood-red announcement was pinned to the top, an emergency notice from the Dragon Kingdom officials. The altars had changed during the blood moon, and citizens were urged to stay indoors and act with extreme caution. Powerful sacrificers were encouraged to help fight the disaster, provided they could ensure their own safety, of course. After reading the message, he finally understood that the blood moon was a key for the new day. Any altar that had failed to complete its 10 sacrifices would have its gates unlocked by this very key. However, what emerged from those gates wasn't hope or gods, but calamities linked to the altar's coordinates. After checking his star of hope and the pocket watch of fate, he felt his confidence surge. He remembered the dragon egg was nearly ready to hatch, and these calamities would be its final nourishment. He decided to head out immediately. It was time for the hunt to begin. We see him stepping outside to hunt the calamities, and he quickly spotted an altar not far away. A woman in a blood-red cloak was standing by the altar, so he activated his Eye of Truth. Her name was Witch, and she was only common grade. It seemed the first blood moon monsters weren't very strong. He let out a cold laugh and crept forward, his soul blade flashing with a chilling light. He successfully pierced the witch's heart from behind, her shrill scream tearing through the silent night sky. The witch dissolved into a pool of black blood, and at that same moment, the nearby altar blew apart. Among the rubble, he found a small glowing object known as an altar fragment. It was used to maintain an altar's normal functions, though he had no idea what use that would be yet. After that, he tossed the fragment directly into his dimensional space and brought out the dragon egg at the same time. The dragon egg wasted no time at all, quickly absorbing every last drop of the witch's blood. We see the hatching progress tick upward, rising steadily from 54% to 55.8%. Even the lingering dark energy was absorbed by the soul blade on the spot, bringing its growth progress to 214. This was certainly better than slaughtering chickens. To him, the blood moon was essentially a high-level experience dungeon. After searching for a short while, he quickly locked onto his second target, a creature known as a giant junk monster. Its quality was merely common, and he ended the fight with a single punch, claiming another altar fragment for his efforts. He grew more excited with every kill. While the blood moon was a disaster for the weak, he saw it differently. To him, these calamities and the shattered altars were rare resources that couldn't be found just anywhere. Suddenly, his brow furrowed as he spotted a creature covered in bone spikes just ahead. It was excitedly gnawing on an altar, a bone demon of elite quality. Finally, something a bit more interesting. Since elite rank meant the chance for green quality items, he decided to eliminate the bone demon instantly. He launched a flying kick at the beast, but it suddenly turned, its body glowing with a strange red light. His kick only managed to push it back a few meters, failing to deal any real, substantial damage. It seemed elite calamities possessed more than just higher stats. They had a certain level of cunning as well. As he charged back into the fray, we shift to a dilapidated factory where a brother and sister hide behind a shipping container. They were trembling with fear, trapped by a mutated monster that was currently lurking nearby. The creature began walking toward them with a haunting, unsteady gait, while the brother gripped a metal pipe with white knuckles. In the blink of an eye, the monster flickered right in front of them. Without hesitation, the boy pushed his sister aside. He launched a desperate attack, but the monster was faster, instantly raising a massive, ancient bone blade. The sister watched in horror as her brother's body was torn in two. Meanwhile, on a distant snow-capped mountain, countless soldiers were desperately fighting back monsters, their bullets raining down on the creatures ahead. The rounds did little more than strike a few sparks, prompting the captain to roar that they had to fight regardless. If they let these things down the mountain, he knew the villages below would be completely wiped out. Elsewhere, on a desolate stretch of Gobi Desert, a 5-person team was covered in wounds and scars. Despite their injuries, their faces beamed with excitement. They had just defeated an elite-rank calamity. The captain picked up 3 altar fragments, noting that the organization needed to study their potential uses. Orders had even been issued to buy them at high prices, so he urged his team to work hard tonight. A red-haired woman nearby let out a cold, confident laugh, proud of their team's undeniable strength. They had gathered 5 fragments in one night. Surely even the official experts couldn't match that efficiency. She doubted the higher-ups realized just how difficult these fragments were to obtain. We return to our protagonist, who was currently wiping the sweat from his brow while grumbling about another wasted effort. To be honest, he was annoyed. The bone demon had been torn to pieces, but it hadn't dropped a single drop of blood for the dragon egg. After picking up 3 more altar fragments, he vanished back into the night, determined to keep pushing forward. He told himself that with a little more effort, the little dragon girl might finally hatch tonight. The dragon egg was on the verge of hatching, but he soon realized this entire area had been picked clean. As he stood there, his mind drifted back through the various battles he had fought throughout the night. There was that iron giant that could ignore the soul blade, seemingly immune to all cutting and piercing damage. But he had simply laughed once he realized its weakness, dismantling the creature into scrap metal with a few punches. Then there was an elite-rank nightmare, a creature whose cunning allowed it to manifest terrifying illusions. We see him appearing inside a themed hotel, where he pushed open a door only to find Xiao Weiwei and her wealthy boyfriend. The heated scene between the two didn't bother him at all. Instead, he sent them both to the afterlife with a single, swift strike. Once the nightmare lost its power, he simply crushed it in his hands. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation and looked up at the sky. He watched as the crimson hue on the moon rapidly faded away. Checking his phone, he saw it was now 4 in the morning. He wondered if the blood moon always ended at this hour, and then he turned his attention to the progress of the dragon egg and soul wall. To his satisfaction, the hatching progress of the dragon egg had already reached 82.8%. The soul wall's growth had reached 647, though it hadn't yet shown the true grandeur of a mythic tier item. He suspected a qualitative change would occur once the growth bar was full, so he counted the 31 fragments in his space once more. With a satisfied nod, he headed home to sleep. Upon returning to the slaughterhouse, he exchanged matches for yuan shui as usual. After that, he laid down and drifted off, but he soon found himself trapped in a truly bizarre and unsettling dream. Imagine the scene. He had become a giant ant, sprinting desperately through a narrow, dark tunnel. Behind him was a massive, grinding wheel of flesh and blood. If he stopped for even a second, he would be sucked in. Ahead lay a pile of mangled remains crushed by the wheel. Seeing this, a cold shiver ran through his entire body. Suddenly, a ghostly, chilling voice echoed through the void, calling out to him from the darkness. He woke up with a start, thinking the nightmare was utterly ridiculous, yet the devouring hunger in the dream felt incredibly real. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it. After taking a moment to compose himself, he reached for the phone beside him. Out of habit, he clicked into the online forums, but his expression changed the moment he saw the screen. Blood-red posts were everywhere, their popularity even eclipsing the discussions about last night's blood moon phenomenon. Cries, curses, and dark jokes flooded every section, but what truly caught his eye and surprised him was something else. It was the bright red pinned announcement, an official notice from the Dragon Kingdom regarding the response to the changing world. The first announcement stated that the official forum was now live, urging all citizens to register immediately. Secondly, the authorities began recruiting dragon guards, calling upon any citizen willing to serve and possessing sufficient strength. Interested parties could sign up in the corresponding forum module, after which a dedicated official would contact them. Thirdly, the government would now purchase altar fragments without limit for 20,000 each, truly explosive news, by any standard. Sue raised an eyebrow at the screen. The idea of these dragon guards was certainly an interesting development. It was a clear attempt to gather the scattered power of the people and bring it under official control. However, we see that the most heated discussions on the forum were centered entirely around those altar fragments. Everyone was speculating on their true purpose, especially since the official price offered was anything but low. Most people lacked the strength to obtain them, but Sue thought of the 31 fragments resting in his dimension. At the current rate, they were worth 620,000, more than he could have saved in 10 years of labor. Still, until he understood their actual function, he had no intention of selling a single piece of his hoard. Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his hand. It was a call from Zhao Gang, seeking to speak with him. The man thanked Boss Sue profusely, explaining that thanks to his help, his daughter's medicine was finally secured. He then hesitantly asked if he could seek one more favor, to which Sue, intrigued, told him to go ahead. Zhao Gang explained that he and his wife had ventured back to the traps again earlier that day. They had scavenged a white-quality light bulb and an axe, even though they knew such items were largely considered useless. Desperate for funds, he asked if Sue would still buy them, offering to take whatever small amount Sue felt was fair. The man's voice grew quieter, clearly feeling that his request might seem a bit greedy under the circumstances. But Sue noticed something important. It seemed the officials and other organizations had no use for these trash items. Only his Scarlet Throne could turn such waste into wealth, and a bold new plan began to take shape in his mind. Without missing a beat, Sue told him that he would take them, suggesting they meet later that evening to discuss the details. After hanging up, he began to reflect. Simply scavenging for trash himself was far too slow, but acting as a boss behind the scenes? Establishing a massive recycling network seemed like the perfect move, and we see that the timing couldn't be better. It all depended on whether Zhao Gang could pass this little test. Next, Sue dialed Boss Wang's number. He told Boss Wang to come collect yesterday's processed chickens, and, while he was at it, to bring another 800 over. Boss Wang happily agreed at once, and it wasn't long before a fresh truckload of chickens arrived at the scene. Sue transformed into a relentless force, his blade rising and falling as he efficiently processed the mountains of poultry. By 4:30 in the afternoon, he finally wiped the sweat from his brow, satisfied that the day's work was done. At this point, the Dragon Egg's progress had surged to 85%, while the Soul Wall's growth reached 720 points. The future was looking bright. At 5:30, he arrived at an old residential complex and called Zhao Gang. He soon followed the man into his home. Though the apartment building was dim and damp, the interior told a different story. The rooms were spotless, decorated with several innocent drawings on the walls, clearly the work of Zhao Gang's young daughter. Sue felt a brief pang of sympathy at the sight. He asked if Zhao was home alone, noticing the man's eyes grow dim. Zhao explained that his wife and daughter were still at the hospital, where they spent most of their time. They usually stayed there to keep her company, but he had returned home today for a specific reason. He simply wanted to sell those 2 items to raise a bit of cash. With that, he pulled the objects out. Su quietly activated his Eye of Truth, revealing a glowing light bulb and a rusted iron axe. Both were common white-quality items. Unless fed to the Scarlet Throne, they were, quite frankly, completely useless. Zhao Gang looked on expectantly, tentatively asking if 500 would work, or perhaps 500 for both. After naming his price, Zhao tensed up visibly, terrified that Su might find it too expensive and simply walk away. Hearing that price, Su felt a slight jolt of surprise. Buying white-quality items for only 500 was practically a steal. At that price, they would be snatched up instantly, but he didn't rush to agree, asking instead if Zhao knew many people. Zhao Gang could only offer a bitter, helpless smile, noting that his old friends now avoided him like the plague. These days, the only people he dealt with were fellow patients, and here, we see Su spot a golden opportunity. He pulled out an altar fragment and asked if Zhao recognized it, causing the man's pupils to dilate in shock. Zhao stammered that he had seen it on the forums, a rare drop that appeared whenever a monster was slain during the blood moon. The official price was set at 20,000, a staggering sum that made the fragment in Su's hand seem to glow with value. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Zhao asked if Boss Su wanted him to help sell the item. Noticing the growing admiration in the man's eyes, Su patted Zhao on the shoulder and laid out his proposal for a partnership. He offered to give Zhao the fragment to sell, stating that he only required 20,000 from the final proceeds. The rest of the profit would belong entirely to Zhao, who looked up sharply, certain he must have misheard the offer. However, his expression shifted rapidly, moving from pure ecstasy to a lingering sense of confusion. Su explained that he didn't need the cash directly. Instead, he wanted Zhao to go to his fellow patients at the hospital. He wanted Zhao to act as his agent, collecting more items like the ones on the table, regardless of the initial cost. For every single item brought in, Su would pay a flat 500, and no, that wasn't 500 for a pair. It was 500 for every individual piece. Hearing this, Zhao's mind began to race with the sheer scale of the potential profit. His instincts as a former financial analyst kicked in, realizing this was essentially a license to print money from trash. As long as he acquired items for less than 500, he would turn a steady profit, but he soon sensed something was off. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world, and Zhao's voice grew hoarse as he wondered what Su was really after. He asked what the catch was, knowing that dealing with a man as clever as Su required absolute clarity. Su looked at him calmly and explained that he was offering an opportunity, though his requirements were quite simple. First, regardless of the price Zhao sold the fragments for or bought the items at, Su's name was never to be mentioned. From start to finish, Su was to remain non-existent. Zhao's task was to build a trading circle that belonged entirely to himself. When asked if he understood, Zhao Gang felt his heart sink, realizing this was a confidentiality agreement of the highest order. Boss Su intended to hide himself completely behind the scenes. In other words, the secrets Su held were likely immense. They were likely big enough to invite deadly consequences, and Zhao Gang was being positioned as the white glove out in front. He was to be the firewall, so to speak, and he knew that claiming such high profits always came with a side of risk. Su locked eyes with him and delivered the second condition. If Zhao accepted any fakes, the consequences were his alone to bear. Therefore, Su advised him to keep his eyes wide open when choosing partners for their little venture. What Su demanded was efficiency, stability, and a steady, never-ending stream of goods from the hospital patients. Of course, he added that Zhao could choose to decline. In that case, Su would simply buy the 2 items for 1,000 and leave. But that would be the end of their intersection, leaving Zhao to choose his own path forward. The room fell silent, save for Zhao Gang's heavy, labored breathing as he felt the overwhelming pressure radiating from the young man. Choosing the former was like walking a tightrope, while the latter offered temporary safety, but he truly didn't want to go back. He couldn't return to that desperate cycle of begging for a few hundred in medical fees. Only by dancing over the abyss could he survive. It was the only way to give his daughter hope and his only chance to turn his life around, so Zhao gritted his teeth and agreed. Satisfied, Su tucked the 2 white-quality items away, though he pointedly avoided using his dimensional space in front of the man. One can never be too careful, after all. He handed over the altar fragment and prepared to take his leave. He told Zhao to get things moving and contact him once the foundation was laid, before finally stepping out of the house. However, just as he walked out of the residential complex, a very strange sensation suddenly washed over him. We see that an invisible pair of eyes is watching him from the shadows, though his body has been strengthened by the primal blood. His senses have become incredibly sharp, and combined with the mysterious intuition of the Fate pocket watch, he feels a strange pull. This feeling is certainly not a coincidence, so after buying some supplies at a supermarket, Su decides to test his theory. Carrying bags of supplies, he intentionally walks toward the outskirts of the city until he reaches a completely deserted area. There, he stops in his tracks and speaks calmly to the empty air around him. Shadows emerge from behind the trees as a dozen burly men wielding blades slowly surround him from all sides. At that moment, the screech of tires pierces the night sky as a black sedan pulls into view. A foot wearing a red high-heeled shoe steps out first, revealing the visitor to be none other than Xia Weiwei. She is wearing heavy makeup today, though it can barely hide the lingering swelling on her cheeks, a gift from their last meeting. To be honest, those slaps from yesterday were quite harsh, and Wei Wei's voice is now thick with resentment and rage. Su looks at her with nothing but impatience, casually scanning the group with a single, disinterested glance. Every item and piece of equipment these men are carrying is instantly visible to him. They are, quite frankly, pathetic. Imagine seeking trouble while armed with nothing but white-quality junk. The strongest among them is merely the scarred leader. He wears a green-quality strength vest, and while it's a small prize, Su figures even a mosquito's leg is still meat. The scarred man lets out a furious roar, his machete glowing with a green light as it swings down towards Su. Seeing that Su doesn't even flinch, the man feels a surge of cruel joy, thinking this fool actually intends to take the hit. He is convinced that a single strike from this blade is enough to do more than just kill a man. Even a bull would be sliced clean in half, yet in the very next second, the impossible happens. The sneer on the scarred man's face instantly freezes as Su doesn't even blink at the incoming steel. With 2 fingers, he effortlessly catches the sharp blade, and the entire area falls into a deathly, disbelieving silence. Before the scarred man can even process what happened, he is sent flying backward like a discarded ball. His chest is completely crushed, killed instantly by Su, leaving the dozen thugs who were so menacing just a moment ago in shock. The fire in their eyes is instantly extinguished. After all, their leader was taken out with a single, effortless blow. A blonde-haired thug nearby is the first to snap out of it, his fear driving him to scramble away on all fours to save his life. But a calm, flat voice echoes right in his ear, and a blurred afterimage appears before his eyes. The blonde man's body suddenly stiffens, his escape coming to a very permanent end. As Su's growth progress reaches 721, the remaining men see this and immediately turn tail to run for their lives. The tiny sliver of hope they held has completely vanished. This isn't a fight they can win. This is, quite clearly, a massacre, as Su moves like a reaper under the moonlight, harvesting them like ripe wheat. The last survivor collapses, wetting himself while begging for mercy, but Su coldly interrogates him about their base. It turns out Xiao Weiwei has climbed the social ladder and is now being used by a powerful figure named Lady Wuyan. Thanks to the organization's vast intelligence network, they tracked him down quickly, and the man spills everything he knows. Su uses his soul wall to finish him off, ensuring no loose ends remain, until only one person is left alive. We see Xiao Weiwei, who has been standing frozen in place from the very beginning. She watches as the organization members she once thought were invincible fall in heaps like harvested grain, and her brain simply ceases to function. Everything happening before her eyes has completely shattered her understanding of reality. As Su begins to walk toward her step by step, Weiwei finally snaps out of her trance and lets out a sound. It is a shrill, distorted scream as she desperately uses both hands and feet to scramble away. She crawls backward like an ugly insect, driven by a primal instinct to survive. "Kinga, I was wrong. I was truly wrong," she cries out, reminding him of how sweet their past used to be. She begs him to spare her life just this once, pleading for him to look back on the affection they once shared. Weiwei promises that as long as he lets her go, she will do absolutely anything he asks of her. She offers him money and items, desperate to find anything that might hold some value to him now. She even claims she can provide him with green-tier resources every single day, without fail. She goes as far as suggesting she could continue being his girlfriend, as if that were still a prize worth having. She promises to be completely obedient, her incoherent pleas revealing a truly pathetic state of desperation. Su stops right in front of Weiwei, his eyes cold and indifferent as he asks if she remembers their encounter at the pedestrian street. Weiwei's body trembles violently. She remembers it all too well, of course. When Su extends his foot and signals for her to come closer, she hesitates, feeling the weight of the humiliation. But compared to staying alive, dignity means very little, and she begins to crawl toward him inch by inch. Suddenly, 2 crisp, sickening cracks echo through the night air as Su ruthlessly crushes both of her arms. He looks directly into her eyes and tells her that while she might be willing, he finds her far too filthy. He thrusts the soul wall forward to end it, but a sudden, ominous sensation washes over him. A mist of blood explodes, and Weiwei's body vanishes into thin air. The strange blood shield technique has been triggered again. For the second time, at the very moment of the killing blow, his target has escaped right from under his nose. A flash of silent rage rises within him as he recalls the information squeezed from the last survivor earlier. The man had mentioned a high-ranking figure in the organization who was seriously injured a few days ago. It seems Lady Wuyan thinks highly of Weiwei, and the two share the exact same blood shield technique. Everything clicks into place. That tall woman from the other day was indeed the high-ranking Lady Wuyan herself. It seems highly likely that this bizarre life-saving technique was a gift from Lady Wuyan to Weiwei, courtesy of the Shadow Organization. We see here a subterranean force that has begun to take shape, quietly festering and growing within the deep shadows of the city. Su realizes he must act quickly to crush them all before this hidden enemy can evolve into an unstoppable monster. His plan is simple. Use his 3 trap opportunities for the day, then pay a personal visit to their so-called stronghold. A little later, as he begins to harvest his spoils of war, his fingers stop just inches away from a valuable item. Suddenly, an intense sensation of being watched washes over him, a feeling far more chilling than the clumsy stalkers from before. This observer is calm and perfectly hidden. To be honest, they are clearly a top-tier expert in the art of concealment. Su curses silently as his killing intent boils over, and he suddenly shatters the ground beneath him to lunge forward. His body leaves a blurred afterimage in the air as he shoots toward the direction of that piercing, unseen gaze. In the span of just a few breaths, he reaches the corner of the wall, yet he finds the area completely empty. Only a few shallow footprints remain, confirming that someone was indeed there, and they had successfully escaped. The stranger was decisive and reacted with incredible speed. Such combat literacy is, frankly, quite terrifying to behold. He is certain this isn't someone from the Shadow Organization, as Weiwei wouldn't have access to a powerhouse of this caliber. Therefore, it is likely an elite from the official authorities, as only they possess the resources to train such high-level talent. Being targeted by a group like Shadow didn't bother him much, as they were merely a collection of thugs in his eyes. However, being watched by the government is a different matter entirely. Being hunted by a state machine is always a hassle. No matter how confident or powerful he becomes, he isn't arrogant enough to think he can single-handedly oppose the authorities. It all depends on how they label him, an out-of-control killer to be eliminated or a civilian powerhouse to be recruited. He lets out a soft, dry chuckle and continues collecting his loot, seemingly unbothered by the weight of the situation. 2 kilometers away, a scout named Heibao leans against a cold wall, sweat dripping down his face in a state of pure shock. This cold sweat wasn't from the exertion of running. It was born of pure terror at that ghost-like speed. He couldn't shake the memory of that terrifying burst of power and those cold, utterly emotionless eyes. Within the Bureau of Abnormal Affairs, Heibao was known as the top expert in tracking and counter-surveillance. Qin Feng and the rest of the staff listened to the report in stunned silence, the room becoming deathly quiet. Usually, Heibao was the picture of calm and composure, even a bit cold-hearted at times. And yet, here he was, losing his cool to such an extent over a single target. Qin Feng and his team immediately pulled up the photos on the big screen, and this time, the view was clear. It was no longer just a profile shot. Lin once stared at the screen, her pupils shrinking in realization. Qin Feng's expression grew incredibly solemn as he processed the implications. He wondered if they had actually been under the target's observation since the very beginning. Suddenly, a weak voice broke the silence, and everyone turned to see who had spoken. We see a female team member pointing at the screen with a very strange look on her face. She asked if this could be the same person who triggered the golden and red light incidents. A collective gasp filled the command center, while several senior analysts simply shook their heads. Their faces were masks of disbelief. The idea seemed far too absurd, as the target looked far too young. With no apparent background to speak of, Qin Feng rubbed his head, feeling a massive headache coming on. Just as the crowd began to whisper, a serious-looking investigator walked quickly into the room. He informed Captain Qin and Professor Zhou that the target's detailed identity and history had been found. Qin Feng took a deep breath and flipped open the first page of the newly arrived file. On the front page was a standard ID photo of Su Tianxing, showing a young man with very clear eyes. He even had a hint of a sunny smile on his lips, and his personal resume was just as ordinary, simple, even. There were no records of illegal acts or violent tendencies, at least until Qin Feng flipped to the final page. As they reached the section on family relations, the pupils of everyone in the command center suddenly contracted. His father, Su Weigua, was listed as deceased, as was his mother, Chen Jing. The date of death was June 7th. It was a car accident. The investigator adjusted his glasses, his expression growing heavy as he addressed Captain Qin. He explained that he had carefully checked the files of that accident, and to be honest, it was far too suspicious. It seemed as though some clues had been forcibly erased, and the surveillance cameras had conveniently broken the day before. The driver's cause of death didn't match the report at all. Back then, a junior officer assigned to the case had insisted on pursuing the investigation. However, just 1 month later, his entire family suffered a fatal gas poisoning accident. Qin Feng took a long, heavy drag of his cigarette. We learned that Su Tianxing's father was actually a veteran scout who, during an undisclosed overseas conflict, saved his entire squad and brought back critical intelligence at the cost of being severely wounded. He had retired with honor. The investigator continued, noting that the mother, Chen Jing, was one of the country's top cardiac surgeons and had participated in numerous humanitarian rescue missions. She had even risked her life to save a high-ranking official from an allied nation. One was a soldier with an iron soul, the other a dedicated healer. For such a heroic couple, news of their deaths should have sparked a massive investigation, and Tianxing, as their only child, should have received the highest level of pension and protection. But the reality was that the entire matter had been ruthlessly suppressed. He hadn't received a single cent of compensation, left behind as if he had been completely forgotten by the world. Lin Wan listened to the report, her voice trembling as she asked why he hadn't sought help from the authorities. A heavy silence fell over the command center, broken only by Qin Feng, who looked through the smoke with a complicated gaze. He asked her to imagine a 20-year-old student whose parents had suddenly died in a suspicious accident. With every witness either dead or injured, would he dare make a scene? Perhaps the boy understood the situation from the start. If he had caused trouble, he likely would have become the next accident the very next day. To survive, he had to act. By living quietly like a true orphan and keeping his head down, he managed to keep his life until now. Professor Zhou adjusted his glasses and turned away, noting that the depths of this conspiracy were truly bottomless. Suddenly, Qin Feng stood up and instructed Xiao Liang to take on the difficult task of discreetly reopening the old case. For now, the operational strategy regarding Tiansheng was to be put on hold while they gathered more information. Until the truth was uncovered, they wouldn't label him. He wasn't an enemy, at least, not yet. Qin Feng picked up the files, reminding everyone that tonight's meeting was to remain strictly confidential. They couldn't allow the child of heroes who bled for their country to continue living a life of tears. Meanwhile, we see that Tianxing has completed 2 more traps, but both resulted in epic-grade items. Since those were only suitable for the Crimson Throne, he continued his search for something more appropriate. Eventually, he came to a halt in front of a cluster of derelict buildings that gave off a foul, lingering stench. Above him hung a crooked, rusted sign for a pet market, and he instinctively covered his nose from the smell. However, his eye of truth caught a faint flicker of energy, and based on his previous experiences, he knew what to do. He decisively pushed open the rusted iron gate, entering an area where the very air tasted of decay and rot. Countless iron cages were piled in the corners, but he stopped short when he spotted a very unusual altar ahead. It bore a striking resemblance to the Crimson Throne, measuring over 2 meters in diameter. It was a massive, pulsating mound of flesh radiating an ominous aura, filled with the shadows of insects devouring one another. It seemed to be brewing a supreme king that would eventually hatch. To be honest, calling this thing an altar felt like a stretch. Tiansheng didn't dare get too close, so he kept his distance and activated his eye of truth to inspect the altar from afar. Several long seconds passed before the text finally flickered into view, identifying it as altar number 1748. The inscription spoke of connecting to the eternal nest, where shadows follow forms and hearts return to unity. It asked how invisible shackles could aid a mortal vessel, seeking a mere scrap of paper to prove a singular heart. As he read this cryptic, divine babble, his skin crawled. This was an ancient altar, the kind that usually only exists in legends. He wondered why the universe was suddenly playing word games with him, so he reread the passage several times, word by word. Still, he couldn't quite grasp what the altar actually required. Eventually, he decided to stop overthinking it. Instead, he simply pulled out his phone and started searching for the phrases. Only then did the meaning gradually become clear. The part about shadows following forms meant that the shadow must always remain tethered to the physical body. The phrase about hearts returning to unity suggested that thought and will needed to be perfectly aligned. In other words, it was about following and loyalty. So, the first keyword was loyalty. As for the second sentence, the part about invisible shackles aiding a mortal vessel was essentially asking a very specific question. How could one take something as intangible and invisible as spiritual loyalty and fix it in place with a tangible, physical contract? It was the literal materialization of the spirit. It's a logic anyone with a girlfriend understands. If you don't buy the bag, you don't love her. It's the same principle, really. He gave a somewhat frantic laugh and continued looking at the search results for the third and final sentence. Seeking a scrap of paper for a singular heart. This was the most contradictory and core part of the puzzle. How could a blank piece of paper with no binding power create a loyalty that never betrays? His lip twitched at the absurdity. He wondered if anyone could truly be so subservient as to evolve into a literal slave, but even understanding the literal words, he still had no idea what to actually offer the altar. Was it a deed of sale, or perhaps an employment contract? Neither seemed right. After all, we know that paper contracts are often fragile things in the face of reality. If the price is high enough, a contract is easily torn, and a deed of sale is merely the result of brute force. Neither represented loyalty from the heart. To make matters worse, he couldn't afford to guess incorrectly. The thought of that black calamity made of countless insects was enough to make his skin crawl. Yes, quite literally. He felt his thoughts hitting a dead end. After an hour of searching for a clue with no success, he punched the nearby wall in a fit of frustration. He hit it with such force that something unexpected happened. A photo album tumbled out of his backpack, falling open to the first page to reveal his father's straight, proud figure. He remembered his father once ruffling his hair and saying, "Listen, kid, we of the Su family never bend our backs." His body jolted as the realization finally struck him. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. For thousands of years, the cultural heritage of the Dragon Kingdom has relied on the strength of bloodlines and clans. No matter where a person goes or how high they climb, they can never truly sever the connection to their family name. The blood in their veins is their root. And what are the genealogy books and the ancestral shrines, if not the most perfect examples of blank text and mortal vessels? A genealogy book is, essentially, just paper with ink. An ancestral tablet is just a piece of carved wood, yet they represent a sense of belonging etched into one's very bones. The confusion in his eyes vanished instantly, only to be replaced by a cold, harsh reality pressing down on him. He had no clan and no genealogy book. His parents had already passed away, leaving him truly alone. His relatives treated him like a plague, avoiding him at all costs. He was, for all intents and purposes, a complete loner. For Sue, this altar had become a dead end, a puzzle that was, quite simply, impossible for him to solve. A moment later, a low chuckle echoed through the silent pet market, the sound growing louder and more manic by the second. Sue snapped his head up, a fierce, flickering light dancing in his eyes as a new resolve took hold. Ever since his parents passed, he had sensed a massive, hidden conspiracy, though the identity of his enemies remained a mystery. He had been trapped in a cycle of desperate speculation, but the arrival of the altar changed everything. The monopolized rules of the world were finally collapsing, and now, he wasn't just going to resist, he was going to hunt. He decided then and there to craft his own ancestral tablet. Looking around, his eyes settled on a collapsed shelf. He reached out and snapped off the thickest piece of pine wood he could find with his bare hands. Without hesitation, he bit into his fingertip and used his own blood to write 2 bold words on the wood: Su Ming. The entire wooden board shuddered violently as the vast energy of his modified blood surged through the grain. He could feel a distinct, spiritual connection forming with the tablet as he carried it toward the altar. He slammed the tablet onto the altar's surface, and suddenly, the world fell into a deafening, heart-pounding silence. A second later, the sound of rattling bones echoed from every direction, making him feel as if he'd been transported to a primeval forest. There, ancient tribes were engaged in a devout ritual, offering up sacrifices in a display of absolute, terrifying faith. Countless colorful, venomous snakes hissed in support, while believers of different sects vied to prove their unwavering loyalty. Suddenly, a booming voice rang out, declaring that this, and only this, was the true essence of the bone. It was about following the ancient rules and offering oneself up with a willing, subservient heart. The voice mocked him, asking how a rootless mortal like Su Ming dared to speak of founding his own lineage. A wave of chaotic willpower slammed into his brain, causing the world before him to flicker and distort like a broken screen. Through the haze, he saw the insects from the cocoon beginning to crawl up his arm. To be honest, it was a gruesome sight. He tried to pull away but found himself paralyzed, while the sole coin in his pocket began to glow with a dark, swirling light. In an instant, Su Ming's eyes turned a violent shade of red as the blood throughout his entire body began to roar. He realized their so-called legacies were merely fading shadows of an old era, while he was the pioneer of a new one. As he asserted his own rules, the illusions shattered instantly, leaving him drenched from head to toe in a cold sweat. Inside the cocoon, the emerging insects suddenly froze before beginning a frantic, cannibalistic frenzy of biting and devouring. The horrific sounds continued until only one remained, a massive, pitch-black beetle that stood alone in the silence. "Is this my Goo King?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and pure excitement. Judging by its aura, it surely belonged to the realm of legends. But then, quite suddenly, his eyelids began to twitch. The membrane surrounding the Goo King abruptly tightened, crushing the sole survivor into a pulp of raw flesh. His composure broke instantly. It felt as if the world was playing a cruel joke after he had risked everything. He had endured a mental assault only to be left with nothing, or so he thought, until the scene changed once more. The discarded remains erupted with a crimson light that shot toward the ceiling, the shockwave making him stumble back. He wondered if something even more powerful was hidden behind that beetle as the red glow slowly began to fade. The altar remained standing, yet its interior was now completely empty, save for a single object floating just above it. A dark, greenish-black core hovered there. He immediately activated his Eye of Truth, revealing a row of green text. It was the heart of the Goo Nest, a mythic-grade item capable of independently absorbing energy from the heavens and earth. Every 15 days, it would randomly breed a brand new insect, but it was the second function that truly caught his eye. It was essentially a perpetual motion machine. Though the intervals were long, these creatures were never truly weak. To be honest, the fact that the second function allowed for the fusion of these insects was a complete game-changer. This meant he could potentially combine common insects into a singular, legendary specimen of unparalleled power. Suddenly, his gaze shifted to the space beside the heart of the Goo Nest, where two distinct insects were now drifting. One was large and the other small, both a deep blood red. The larger one, about the size of a fingernail, rested quietly with its wings folded. The smaller one resembled a tiny red grain, circling the larger insect as Su Ming immediately activated his Eye of Truth. These were the bloodline concentric goo, a legendary grade pair where the mother goo merges with the user and the child goo with the target soul. The host of the child goo would maintain absolute loyalty to the mother goo's host, should any thought of rebellion arise. The mother goo could instantly destroy the child goo's host, a realization that made him draw a sharp, cold breath. The function of this item was nothing short of perverse. Once planted, the target would become his eternal, mindless puppet. Their life and death would rest entirely on his whim. The first person who came to his mind was Zhao Gang, but he quickly reconsidered. This was a legendary grade tool, after all, and using it on an ordinary person felt like a waste. Fine steel should be reserved for the blade's edge. After stowing the items, he prepared to head back and carefully plan his next moves, and this is where our scene shifts. Inside a nearby luxury mansion, we find the eldest Miss Yin Roashua currently tending to her wounds. The internal injuries left from her previous clash with Su Ming were causing her immense pain when, suddenly, the door was burst open. Xiao Weiwei came rushing in, practically crawling. She was covered in blood with a broken arm, looking quite pathetic. She looked like a stray dog pulled from a muddy ditch, and Yin Ruoshue's eyes filled with pure disgust as she called her a useless failure. She demanded to know how she had ended up in such a wretched state, prompting Xiao Weiwei to immediately begin her tearful lament. She claimed she had been ambushed by her useless ex-boyfriend, who had somehow mastered some sort of wicked, dark martial arts. He had slaughtered all the bodyguards protecting her, showing absolutely no respect for their organization, the Black Shadows. He had even forced out the location of their branch's stronghold, a revelation that left Yin Roashua feeling even more speechless. The fact that her entire squad had been wiped out by a single useless ex-boyfriend made her wonder how the girl had the face to even cry. However, she had no time for such nonsense. Since the ex-boyfriend knew the location of the base, she had to take precautions. Yin Roashua immediately called her subordinate, Master Ing, ordering him to raise the stronghold's security level to the absolute maximum. She ordered him to double the manpower, insisting that the place be guarded as tightly as an iron barrel. Nothing was allowed to interfere with her plans, though as she hung up, she winced in absolute agony. Her mind drifted back to that powerful man, Su Ming, just as midnight arrived and the gray rain began to fall. We see Su Ming standing under the eaves with the Cup of Silence. It truly is a useful tool, isn't it? In the future, any creature attempting to mutate would find its tools confiscated by this cup. He then returned to his bedroom. He began to take stock of his current assets, which included mythical-grade items like the Abyssal Magic Dragon Egg. He also possessed the Soul Wall, the Bone Nest Heart, and legendary items like the Dimensional Warehouse and Star of Hope. Adding the newly acquired Bloodline Concentric Goo to the mix, the sheer luxury of his equipment was staggering. If word got out, every faction in the world would likely tear each other apart to claim it. Besides these, he held several bottles of Yuan Snow, capable of both saving lives and leveling up, his true foundation for survival in this chaotic world. After all, the authorities had likely noticed him by now, not to mention the persistent and shadowy Black Shadows organization. With a great battle looming, he needed to be prepared. Just then, his phone vibrated in the quiet room. It was a call from Zhao Gang, whose voice carried a distinct note of excitement as he addressed Su Ming. He reported that the altar fragment Su Ming had given him had finally been sold. The price was 26,000, 30% higher than the official rate, and the buyers were no ordinary people. They claimed to be from the Black Shadows, and had even sent Zhao Gang a formal invitation to join them. They promised internal benefits and some sort of protection, which, to be honest, sounded like a typical recruitment pitch. At the mention of the Black Shadows, Su Ming's fingers stopped tapping the table. Talk about a small world. He had been looking for a way to pull them out by the roots, and now they were knocking on his door. A cold smile touched his lips as he told Zhao Gang to accept the offer, leaving the older man momentarily stunned. Zhao Gang thought he had misheard, but Su Ming's tone turned cold and direct, leaving no room for doubt. He explained that his grudge with the Black Shadows was eternal, and he wanted Zhao Gang to join them as a mole. For Zhao Gang, this was a suicide mission. One could even say he was being asked to walk straight into hell. And so, Zhao Gang fell silent. However, he was a clever man and a desperate father who would do anything for his daughter. Whether it was hell or a mountain of blades, he had to face it, so he gritted his teeth and agreed. As long as his daughter could be saved, his life belonged to Su Ming, which brought a small smile to the young man's face. Rather than making empty promises, Su Ming asked about the girl's condition and learned she suffered from acute leukemia. Looking at the dark red yuan blood in his hand, a truly wild idea began to take root in his mind. If this substance could reshape flesh and bone, could it perhaps cure Zhao Gang's daughter of her illness? To truly win someone's loyalty, one must perform a miracle, so he began to lay out the next steps of the plan. He told Uncle Zhao that he would come by tomorrow afternoon to collect the first batch of items. He promised to bring another altar fragment for Zhao Gang to use as a bargaining chip with the Black Shadows. He also expressed his wish to visit the daughter in the hospital before heading to Zhao Gang's home. After hanging up, he lay down to sleep, only to find himself drifting into an utterly ridiculous dream. In this dream, we see him being chased by a vampire dressed in a very formal tailcoat. The vampire looked incredibly elegant and noble, and it wasn't long before he had Su Ming cornered against a wall. Just as Su Ming prepared to fight for his life, the creature leaned in and whispered with an air of absolute superiority. Su Ming woke up with a start, laughing in pure frustration. It seemed the Scarlet Throne was sending him messages in his sleep. Apparently, it felt the matches he had been feeding it were beneath its dignity, so he marched down to the basement in a huff. He stood before that pulsing heart and gave it a piece of his mind, which, to be honest, was a perfectly reasonable reaction. Despite his scolding, Su Ming realized something quite significant. This strange object actually possessed its own consciousness. It seemed to have gained awareness by devouring and purifying items, and now he had to appease this temperamental ancestor. He reluctantly tossed in a few more matches, watching as the heart devoured them twice as fast as before. Deep down, he was delighted. It seemed he would need to find better food to keep this throne satisfied. Next, we see him turn his attention to the dragon egg, where the hatching progress was stuck at 85%. He pulled out a bottle of yuan blood to offer it a special meal, but the egg showed a surprising amount of backbone. With a flick of its tail, it flatly refused the offering without a second glance, leaving Su Ming utterly speechless. It was time for a change of pace, so he called Boss Wang and immediately placed an order for 100 pigs. He was tired of killing chickens and wanted to practice on something new, but the moment Boss Wang heard the word pigs, his voice began to tremble with fear as he warned Su Ming to stay far away from pigs lately. Something sinister had happened at several large pig farms nearby, a revelation that made Su Ming demand more details. Boss Wang shakily explained that while he was on a video call with Old Li the previous night, he had watched those pigs go completely mad, their eyes turning blood red as they began biting everyone in sight. He even witnessed them devouring Old Li on screen, a horrific scene filled with black blood and desperate screams. Terrified out of his wits, Boss Wang had tried calling back later, but no one answered the phone. That place, known as Yahello, had surely become a living hell, yet hearing this only made Su Ming smile. It was a perfect coincidence. He needed a place for experience, and these mutated pigs were practically a gift. He immediately asked for the address, and seeing that Su Ming was determined to go, Boss Wang had no choice. He gave him the location and even offered his own green great axe for protection, which was a kind gesture. Su Ming felt a touch of warmth at the offer. Though the axe was mere scrap metal to him, the sentiment was rare. Su Ming politely declined the axe, telling Boss Wang to stay safe at home until he returned to take him and his wife out for a drink. Our scene shifts as he follows the coordinates to Yahello, a place so remote and desolate that not even a single bird can be seen. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and right in the middle of the road stood a solitary, rusted oil drum. He came to a sudden halt, wondering why on earth a mailbox-like object would be sitting in such a godforsaken place. Activating his eye of truth, he discovered it was altar number 52818, a connecting beacon known as the Myriad World Mailbox. It seemed this entity was addicted to secrets, craving to spy on and share the private gossip of everyone it encountered. Upon seeing the ID number, he couldn't help but smirk. In his language, 52,818 sounded suspiciously like a phrase for, "I love to gossip." This altar's requirements were quite rude, showing a complete lack of boundaries, yet he realized how useful it could be if handled correctly. Perhaps it could reveal some world-shaking secrets, but after a moment of hesitation, he decided to focus on the business at hand. He made his way to a crooked locust tree in the village, where the walls of several pigsties had already half collapsed. As he approached, a bone-chilling sound of chewing echoed from within the ruins, signaling that something was very wrong. Inside, we see a monster significantly larger and more muscular than any ordinary domestic pig. With its back turned to him, it was buried in a feeding frenzy. His eye of truth identified it as a plague-mad pig. It was classified as a common calamity, a livestock animal completely corrupted by pollution with no trace of sanity left. It had become a monster that knew only killing and devouring, leaving Su Ming to ponder the significance of that word, pollution. He wondered what the source of this corruption could be, but he didn't waste any time on idle speculation. Creeping up behind the beast, he raised his blade and struck, sending the massive pig's head rolling across the floor. His growth progress jumped by over 10 points instantly. To be honest, this was much faster than killing chickens. Unexpectedly, the headless corpse suddenly exploded with a deafening blast that shook the entire pigsty. Dozens of plague-mad pigs smashed through the fences and charged out, their blood-red eyes locked onto him with murderous intent. In a scene that would make anyone else tremble with fear, Su Ming felt nothing but a thrill of excitement. To him, these weren't monsters at all, but walking piles of experience points for Hunbai and his little dragon girl. It seemed they would both be eating their fill today as the herd charged forward like a terrifying mudslide. Instead of retreating, he charged head-on, his blade flashing as pig heads began to fly with every single strike. Hunbai's progress bar was skyrocketing, while all around him, the sound of explosions echoed one after another. He moved like a heartless harvester, systematically clearing the monsters from the middle of the frantic herd. Just as Hunbai's progress reached its peak, a sudden, sharp sense of dread washed over his heart. The warning from the pocket watch of fate forced him to leap back, and that was when he noticed something strange. The black blood from the explosions wasn't dissipating. Instead, it was being drawn toward a single point. Every drop flowed toward that crooked locust tree, making him realize the true threat had been hiding in plain sight. The real boss was the tree itself, which suddenly roared to life after drinking its fill of the dark blood. Its withered branches began to grow and spread with unnatural speed as countless blood-red leaves sprouted from nothing. They formed a demonic canopy that blotted out the sun, a sight so absurd it prompted a dry remark from him. He wondered if he had wandered into a legend about a forest coming to life as the trunk began to churn and shift. A massive, solitary eye grew directly out of the wood. The tree was alive, and he immediately activated his Eye of Truth. Lines of burning, blood-red text flickered wildly before him, identifying this as altar number V177. It was a connecting beacon known as the rotting seedbed, which used the flesh and blood of all living things as fuel. Its purpose was to nurture a son of decay in this place of despair. Curiously, this ID number started with AV. He didn't have time to ponder what that meant, but the pressure emanating from the tree was undeniable. It felt even more powerful than the epic wraith from before, and it was currently busy birthing something truly foul. He knew he had to kill it before it fully formed, gripping the newly upgraded Hunbai as he prepared for a devastating strike. But just as he was about to charge, a massive explosion rocked the ground, and the very earth beneath his feet erupted. He was forced to retreat like an arrow shot from a bow, which was a wise move, considering the spot where he had just been standing. Countless crimson vines had violently pierced through the soil, while above him, the blood-red canopy began to shake with a terrifying intensity. Tens of thousands of leaves transformed into a rain of blades, whistling down as they turned the entire area into a death trap. This place had become the monster's absolute domain, prompting him to use the Eye of Truth once more to see what they were dealing with. The true name of the one-eyed tree demon finally flickered into view: Huaima, the Fourth Lord, a creature of pure malice. It was an epic-grade calamity, a nightmare birthed directly from the mutation altar to serve a dark purpose. Its sole mission was to protect the descent of the Son of Decay, revealing that the V designation referred to the altar itself. There was no time for further reflection, as he immediately activated the bullet time ability of his pocket watch of fate. The razor-sharp leaves were already inches from his head, forcing him into a frantic dance to navigate the dense, lethal barrage. He moved with desperate agility through the gaps between vines and blades, but the monster's firepower was simply overwhelming. Despite his best efforts, a single leaf shimmering with an eerie red light managed to slice deep into his arm. The wound turned black and began to rot instantly, causing his expression to shift as he forced his internal energy to surge. He struggled to suppress the spreading poison, but that momentary hesitation was all a massive vine needed to find its mark. It slammed into his back with enough force to nearly shatter his bones, a blow that would have ended a lesser man. He coughed up a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying, feeling the cold shadow of death looming over him once again. To be honest, an epic-grade monster was proving to be a bit much, especially as another giant vine came sweeping toward him. With no way to dodge, he suddenly remembered the cup of gray rain and decided to try a desperate, last-ditch gamble. He pulled out the cup of silence and threw its contents directly at the vine, and then a miracle happened. The massive vine, which had enough power to crush a tank, began to crumble the very moment it touched the gray rain. It instantly turned into rotten wood and drifted away as ash, leaving even the great one-eyed Huaima stunned and clearly confused. Taking advantage of the monster's hesitation, he pushed off the ground and charged once more, driving Huaima into a total rage. Countless crimson vines erupted from the earth as the creature revealed its true form, but by now, there was no turning back. He carefully sprinkled the remaining gray rain to clear a path, forcing his way through the rain of lethal leaves toward the main body. The price, of course, was heavy. His body was covered in countless new wounds, and his consciousness began to flicker and fade. Yet he drew closer to that single eye, 30 meters, 20, then 10, and that was exactly when disaster struck. The cup of gray rain ran dry, and his heart skipped a beat. He knew his final life-saving trump card was gone. Huaima seized the opportunity immediately, its trunk splitting open to fire a single, pitch-black vine intended for a killing blow. The speed was despairingly fast. Even within the predictions of the pocket watch of fate, only the blood-red hue of death remained. At the absolute critical moment, he pulled out that single match of hope and struck it, lighting a flame in the deepest darkness. With a deafening roar, the tiny flame touched the vine and triggered a massive, violent explosion. He managed to block that fatal strike through sheer force of will. After all, fire conquers wood, and that was his only hope. Seizing the opening, he became one with his blade, transforming into a streak of black light that pierced deep into the terrified eye. With a sharp crack, the giant eye shattered, and the massive tree that reached toward the heavens began to collapse and disintegrate. It transformed into a pillar of black light connecting heaven and earth, a terrifying vision that could be seen across all of Jiangzhou. The shockwave threw him dozens of meters, leaving him bloodied and battered, yet he began to laugh, because, against all odds, he had won. He had survived an epic-grade calamity once again, and now, he dragged his broken body toward the center of the battlefield. At the heart of the black pillar of light, two shimmering objects caught his attention, standing out amidst the wreckage. The first was a black sphere the size of a fist, and in an instant, the Eye of Truth flickered to life to reveal its secrets. It was the miniature altar star of Huaima, an item of epic quality that pulsed with a dark, rhythmic energy. This artifact could be permanently fused with any altar, transforming and reconstructing it into something far more powerful. It was a core that only forms after a liquefied altar is destroyed, both a lingering image of death and an embryo of new life. However, it was a consumable. Once fused, any attempt to forcibly remove the star would cause it to vanish forever. After that, we see him turn his attention to the second trophy, the Mark of Decay, a legendary quality item. His soul was now branded with a faint scent of rot, granting him a connection to all negative forces related to decay. This provided massive resistance and affinity, though, to be honest, just increasing resistance might seem a bit underwhelming at first. But just as he prepared to store the ashes, the blood-red text appearing before his eyes made his skin crawl. He had piqued the interest of the slumbering son of decay, who now looked forward to their formal meeting. He panicked instantly. It turned out that killing the subordinate hadn't ended the threat, but had instead drawn the master's gaze. It felt like being a tiny ant noticed by a giant, so he cursed under his breath and hurried to make his escape. After all, that towering pillar of black light was far too conspicuous, but he had barely taken 2 steps when things changed. The mark of decay within his dimensional space stirred, and a will that did not belong to this world suddenly descended. An indelible mark was branded upon him, and within the pitch-black storm, he caught a glimpse of a distant figure. It was the son of decay himself. Gritting his teeth, he activated the Eye of Truth as an unprecedented pain seared his vision. 2 streaks of hot, bloody tears fell from his eyes as he pushed himself to the limit, desperate to see the truth. He needed to know exactly what he was facing, yet the name remained unknown and the quality remained a mystery. With the description also hidden, he couldn't suppress the turmoil in his chest and spat out a mouthful of dark blood. The entity seemingly transcended the current limits of the Eye of Truth, and we must admit, he has many advantages. And while he is certainly a powerhouse in this world, before those beings, he was still nothing more than an ant. A moment later, he looked up at the sky once more, only to find that the terrifying figure had completely vanished. Meanwhile, the entire city of Jiangcheng had descended into absolute chaos as the Bureau of Abnormal Affairs sounded a level 1 alarm. They officially named this black light event Dahaitian, and even Yen Ruoshua witnessed the chilling phenomenon from afar. She immediately gathered her elites to rush to the scene, while every hidden monster and rogue faction began to stir. They all swarmed toward the Li family estate. Anyone with even a shred of power was desperate to reach the source. Everyone wanted a piece of the prize, yet we see him moving in the opposite direction, heading back to that mysterious Bagua altar. As he traveled, he checked his upgraded Soul Jade, now renamed the Ultimate Soul Jade and boasting a mythical quality. It gained the purity of all laws ability, ensuring his mechanics surpassed all others, along with a new soul siphon function. Upon killing a target, it would now absorb their life essence to restore the holder's combat strength. This effectively allowed for infinite combat endurance, and it even added a final, devastating function, Divine Majesty. This granted a staggering 1000% damage bonus against mythical-level units, a truly absurd set of attributes, to be honest. Looking at these god-tier stats, he felt an overwhelming urge to thank the Soul Jade personally for being so incredibly powerful. The attributes after the promotion were simply broken. Purity of all laws meant he would never suffer from weak, chip damage attacks again. Soul Siphon covered his greatest weakness. As long as the slaughter continued, he would be a literal perpetual motion machine. And that final Divine Majesty was the most dominant of all. Given enough time, he might actually be able to kill a god. Once he returned to the oil drum altar, he dipped his finger in blood and wrote 8 bold characters on a piece of white paper. I have seen a god, and I wish to serve one. He stuffed it into the drum, which immediately erupted in shrill laughter and light. It seemed this particular piece of gossip was far too explosive, as the drum slot spat out a weathered, ancient black envelope. He grabbed the envelope and turned to run immediately. After all, he had caused far too much of a scene already. The altar's voice echoed, claiming it loved his secret and would trade 2 of its own. First, the gray rain does not come from the sky. Instead, it is the tears of a hero, a revelation that makes us catch our breath, as this world-altering gray rain is actually the sorrow of a single being. Imagine what kind of existence that must be. Then, a second secret emerges. Those artists are already growing impatient and are performing their final rehearsals. Specifically, he is very eager to meet you. This causes him to knit his brows in deep thought. Who exactly are these artists, and who is this mysterious he? And so, we see him use the Eye of Truth to investigate, attempting to uncover the hidden karma and truth behind these words. In the end, he sees absolutely nothing. A second later, the black envelope and the letter in his hand turn into a handful of golden dust. As the dust dissipates into the air, the clues are severed. Frustrated, he slams his fist onto the table in a fit of pique. This altar truly is a piece of work, acting completely unhinged just to play the part of a cryptic riddle master. Since he can't figure it out, he decides to stop trying. For now, increasing his strength is the only path forward. He then calls Boss Wong. He asks for another 1,000 chickens to be delivered, and during the call, he puts on a bit of a performance. He pretends he was terrified by that massive black pillar and fled. Boss Wong buys it completely, sighing in sympathy. After hanging up, he heads to the basement and pulls out that damaged altar heart. This, we realize, is a massive gamble. If he wins, the Starry Crimson Throne will undergo a transformation. If he loses, he simply wastes an epic tier item. He waves the altar heart in front of the throne, sternly warning the thing not to just eat it like a common snack. Then, he places it directly on top. With a sharp hiss and a puff of smoke, the altar heart suddenly snaps its single eye open. It sprouts countless black roots, attempting a forced parasitic takeover. This, naturally, completely enrages the sleeping monarch. The Starry Crimson Throne roars to life, unleashing a brutal strangulation. In just 1 minute, the battle is over. The black roots are devoured entirely, and everything returns to a state of calm. He is just about to complain that he broke it, when suddenly, a single emerald green branch begins to grow from the very center of the throne. At its tip, a crystal-clear green fruit begins to form. Once again, the Eye of Truth is activated to see what has been wrought. The Starry Crimson Throne has successfully merged with the altar heart, gaining a brand new special attribute. We see that essence blood will now be extracted by the tree of heart blood and funneled into the fruit of heart blood for brewing. The throne begins to refine itself, systematically purging any impurities to make room for this new power. The process is fascinating. Essence blood is drawn into the tree and concentrated within the fruit. This discovery makes his heart race, but since he lacks spare items for testing, a sudden flash of inspiration strikes him. He pulls a bottle of ordinary essence blood from his storage. After all, who says you can't sacrifice blood to make better blood? It is a bit of a loophole, a recursive loop of power, and the Starry Crimson Throne seems almost speechless at the logic. Nevertheless, it obediently swallows the offering. A moment later, the fruit atop the branch erupts with a brilliant light. A brand new bottle of essence blood drops down, the liquid inside now a vibrant, life-filled shade of green. The Eye of Truth confirms it. This is purified heart blood. It doesn't just boost vitality. More importantly, its medicinal properties are incredibly gentle. It can repair the body, purify bloodlines, and even dispel negative energy. A true miracle in a bottle, really. His breathing quickens as he stares at this upgraded version. Finally, the perfect refinement has arrived. He fixates on the words, purify bloodlines, and in that instant, a specific face flashes through his mind. He thinks of Zhao Gang's daughter, who is suffering from leukemia. Previously, he had less than a 10% chance of helping her. He had worried her weakened body couldn't withstand the violent energy of standard potions. But now, things are different. With this gentle, purified version, the probability of her rebirth has skyrocketed to 90%. It is, quite literally, a divine medicine tailored specifically for her. He knows this is more than just saving a life. It is an investment with an immeasurable rate of return. If he saves the daughter, then Zhao Gang, a man of financial genius, will become his most loyal and devoted confidant. To be honest, this was a masterstroke of planning. In a great mood, he pulls out his phone to check the forums. However, after just one glance, his expression shifts instantly. We have to wonder what exactly is happening. He had assumed that taking down Huaima would be the top trending topic. However, when he opens the forums, he finds that while there are posts about the Black Light of Jiangcheng, they are completely buried by far more terrifying news, dominated by a series of blood-red, bolded headlines. The paper figures of Fengdu town have all come to life, parading through the streets with gongs and drums, a warning for the faint of heart. Inside are high-definition photos of Jingcheng, where the midnight air is filled with the deafening sound of mahjong tiles, driving residents mad. Giant mutant fish have appeared in the East Sea, while in Xinjiang, rocks have animated into a legion of giant beasts. They are advancing toward the cities, and abroad, plague volcanoes are erupting. Clearly, every single one of these incidents is the handiwork of those alienation altars he's never seen before. It seems Huaima was not an isolated case. It turns out that after the Blood Moon event, the world never returned to its old rules. The altars are sowing seeds of chaos everywhere. They are nurturing countless unknown horrors, making him realize that he must grow stronger and quickly. By 4 in the afternoon, he has finished processing all 1,000 chickens, yet the 10,000 purification points earned feel like a mere drop in the bucket. The little dragon girl's hatching progress has reached 88%. Since his body has mostly recovered, he decides it is time to meet Zhao Gang, the most vital link in his grand plan. When the call finally goes through, Zhao Gang's voice sounds as if his soul has been hollowed out. He mutters a hospital address and hangs up. 40 minutes later, we see him find Zhao Gang in the hospital corridor, looking ancient and broken, kneeling as he begs the doctor to save his daughter. He is willing to lose everything he owns just to buy specialized medicine from abroad, but the doctor only sighs in helplessness. The cancer cells are spreading too fast. Even a miracle might not be enough. Hearing this, Zhao Gang and his wife completely collapse. And so, he walks over, pats Zhao Gang on the shoulder, and follows the grieving couple into the hospital room. On the bed lies the little girl, Zhao Xinhe, so thin she is almost unrecognizable. When she sees her parents enter, she still manages to squeeze out a brave, sensible smile, even finding the strength to call him uncle. Hearing her call him uncle makes his heart ache. Zhao Gang is kneeling by the bed like a helpless child, clutching his daughter's withered hand as tears stream down his face. At this, the little girl's eyes also well up. She reaches out with a hand that is little more than skin and bone, gently stroking Zhao Gang's tear-stained cheeks. It is a sight that would break even the hardest of hearts. She looks at her father and mother and tells them that if they ever miss her, they should just look up at the night sky. Hearing this, even the doctor has to turn away to hide his emotions. After a moment, he pulls Zhao Gang into the corridor to ask quietly what the situation really is. Zhao Gang leans against the cold wall, his voice hoarse as he sighs, and explains the doctor's verdict. Given the current circumstances, she has half a month at most. Looking at this desperate man, he calmly says 3 words, "I have a way." Naturally, those words cause Zhao Gang's dead eyes to suddenly ignite with light. In an instant, the man is kneeling before him. He slowly leans down, his dark eyes reflecting the man's broken state as he whispers the details. His voice is low, but it causes Zhao Gang's pupils to contract sharply. At first, Zhao Gang shakes his head frantically. It's too absurd and far too dangerous. However, as he continues to shake his head, he slowly comes to a stop. The flicker of fanatical hope has overwhelmed everything else. Why not take the risk? To be honest, he has nothing left to lose. Returning to the room, Zhao Gang explains the plan to his wife. Mrs. Zhao's expression turns to one of pure shock. She looks at her husband in complete disbelief. She is terrified, but then she remembers her daughter has so little time left. Seeing the desperate, almost manic look in her husband's eyes, Mrs. Zhao chooses to believe. She turns to her daughter on the bed, her voice trembling as she tells Xinhe that the uncle has a special medicine, but warns her it might hurt or even be dangerous. She asks if she's afraid. Little Xinhe, weak as she is, just looks back. Without a moment's hesitation, she gently shakes her head and says that little Xinhe isn't afraid of pain. She only wants to stay by her parents' side forever, and if it doesn't work, she tells them they must not blame the uncle. Zhao Gang turns away sharply to hide his tears from her. Seeing this, we watch as he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a bottle of yuanxue, shimmering with green light. Mrs. Zhao's hands tremble as she takes it. The very moment the cap is removed, a surge of vibrant life energy fills the entire hospital room. Even the exhaustion on the couple's faces seems to fade slightly in its presence. It is, quite literally, a divine medicine. Mrs. Zhao is certain of it now, her heart racing with a newfound sense of excitement. She carefully brings the bottle to her daughter's lips, feeding her every last drop of the yuanxue. At first, nothing happens as the liquid goes down, but seconds later, the heart monitor begins to alarm frantically. The doctor hears the noise and tries to rush in, but he finds himself locked out. Then, the miracle occurs. The chaotic lines on the monitor return to a steady rhythm. On the bed, little Xinhe's pale face actually begins to show a faint, healthy glow. Zhao Gang's voice trembles, his tone completely transformed. The little girl slowly opens her eyes, looking around the room. Her parents' hearts tighten once more in suspense until Xinhe adds a small, peaceful smile. With those simple words, the heavy weight pressing down on the Zhao's hearts finally vanishes. Uncontrollable tears burst forth. There is hope now, real, tangible hope. It seems their daughter has been pulled back from the very gates of death. One drop was all it took. Just then, Dr. Zhang finally manages to unlock the door with a spare key. He is ready to explode with anger, but he freezes in his tracks. Before him, he sees a little girl whose face is visibly flushed with life. The readings on the machines return to normal, and seeing this, the doctor's jaw practically hits the floor in shock. Watching this, Zhao Gang turns his head and says with a calm, steady gaze that Dr. Zhang needn't be so surprised. He explains he used an alter item on her, and he doesn't want anyone spreading word of today's events and causing trouble. The doctor snaps out of his shock instantly, clearly hearing the underlying threat in Zhao Gang's voice. He understands exactly what is being said, though he never imagined such a priceless treasure from the alter era would be spent so freely to save one little girl. To possess such an item and use it so casually suggests a terrifying power behind the man. Crushing a doctor like him would be easier than stepping on an ant. Dr. Zhang takes the hint immediately, promising to prepare the follow-up exams while keeping everything strictly confidential. He doesn't linger for a second, turning to leave at once. Once the doctor is gone, Zhao Gang and his wife can no longer contain themselves and try to kneel in gratitude, but he stops them, telling them to focus on their daughter. Reaching the door, he suddenly turns back to look at the little girl one last time. With a final smile, he departs. He had used Zhao Gang, yes, but the recovery was real. Stepping out of the hospital, the smile vanishes from his face as he looks toward the horizon where that black pillar of light still stands. He checks the online forums, his heart trembling slightly as he types the words "blacklight" into the search bar. A massive amount of information appears, mostly tragic accounts of failed traps, but he scrolls through them rapidly. He locks onto a few specific posts. Deep in the mountains of Puan Town, a black pillar reaches the sky and won't dissipate. In Wanning City, the black light looks like a hole punched in the sky, and the authorities have already issued an emergency lockdown. As one of the people who started all this, he knows better than anyone what that black pillar signifies. He might be the first to publicly resolve a Type V liquefaction altar, but he is certainly not the only one capable of it. The number of units in this world able to handle such anomalies is likely far greater than he imagined. Just then, Zhao Gang also exits the hospital. We see Zhao Gang walking through the crowd, his pace slow, but his steps incredibly steady, his back no longer hunched with worry. Instead, he stands tall and straight. Though tear stains still mark his face and his eyes remain swollen, something has changed. Not a single trace of his former despair remains. It is as if he has finally decided to leave the past behind. Step by step, this man emerges from the shadows of his old life, walking toward a brand new future. It is a new beginning granted by our protagonist's own hand. Finally, Zhao Gang comes to a stop right in front of him. In that moment, the surrounding noise of the city seems to quietly fade away into the background. A little later, we find them sitting on the worn-out sofa in Zhao Gang's modest home. He looks over the 17 white-quality items Zhao Gang managed to collect, his gaze sweeping over them as he confirms their value. He offers a simple "well done." Then, right before Zhao Gang's eyes, he gives a light wave of his arm. The small mountain of items vanishes into thin air, causing Zhao Gang's pupils to contract in sheer shock. He catches every bit of that reaction. He knows he has Uncle Zhao's loyalty, but gratitude alone is never enough. He needs the man to remain in awe of his depth, understanding that following him is the only path to a real future. Besides, since Uncle Zhao is managing the recycling station, this particular trick was going to be hard to hide anyway. He then pulls out another altar fragment and tosses it over, telling him to follow the plan they discussed. He instructs him to use it to deal with the Black Shadow group, infiltrating their ranks while moving with extreme caution. Zhao Gang assures him not to worry, noting that from a financial perspective, this is simply a venture capital investment. Since he was the one invested in, he promises he won't let his benefactor lose a cent. He nods in satisfaction, saying no more. This is exactly the state of mind he wanted to see. After all, a well-forged blade should have its own sharp edge. An employee should be exactly like this. With everything arranged and the sky darkening, he turns down the couple's dinner invitation. He leaves the dilapidated apartment building alone, but as he passes a street corner, the rich aroma of baking makes him pause. It is the scent of freshly baked mooncakes, round and golden like the full moon, and only then does he realize the date. Tomorrow is the Mid-Autumn Festival. He tells the shopkeeper he wants the bakey mooncakes, every flavor except the 5-nut variety. Carrying the gift box, he walks into the deepening night, unwrapping a lotus seed and egg yolk cake and taking a large bite. The familiar taste brings a sudden warmth to his eyes, but a moment later, his smile freezes. Mid-Autumn Festival, the gala. Rehearsal number 52818. Suddenly, the true nature and details of the altar explode within his mind with terrifying clarity. Those artists are already impatient, conducting their final rehearsals. Could it really be happening in just these few days? His gaze grows sharp and focused. Right then, a faint, ghostly singing voice begins to drift through the air. It follows the night wind into his ears, a sound so mournful and desolate it feels utterly sinister and unnatural. Who's there? With a flick of his wrist, the soul blade slides into his palm as his cold, killing intent locks onto the surroundings. And yet, there is nothing there. An inexplicable flash of anger rises within him, fueled by the sheer loneliness in that voice. It seems the melody has found a cursed resonance with the solitude he feels while missing his own parents. He lowers his stance and vanishes into the shadows. Minutes later, he pushes aside the overgrown grass, his pupils shrinking in surprise. An abandoned open-air theater appears before him, the spectator seats completely empty and reclaimed by nature. Despite the silence, the air is heavy, as if the rows were filled with invisible ghosts. On stage, 3 distinct voices are intertwining. To the left is a desolate warrior's cry. In the center, a mournful female lead, and to the right, the cackling of a clown. The roles of the stage are all present. He activates the Eye of Truth, and the stage's disguise falls away to reveal 3 altars. As the Eye of Truth scans the area, we see the left altar is built from piles of broken, rusted armor and shattered blades. This is altar number 1001, a connecting beacon to the White Tiger Hall of the Heavenly Theater. A voice laments, "Why, after I fought so hard against the enemy, does the Emperor suspect me of rebellion?" It asks why loyal ministers never meet a good end. Meanwhile, the central altar is composed of phoenix crowns and jewelry. This is altar number 1003, a beacon connecting to the Changmin Palace of the Heavenly Theater. And here, we hear a voice weeping. The voice asks why, after giving him her heart and helping him conquer the world, she was left with nothing. She died alone in the end. To the right, the final altar is constructed from thousands of masks, each with a different expression. This is altar number 1004, the beacon of the Heavenly Theater, known as the faces of all living beings. A voice here is laughing, mocking the rise and fall of grand ambitions, laughing at everyone in this world as if they were blind fools. All three numbers belong to the highest sequences. These three spirits represent resentment, sorrow, and nihilism. The pattern becomes clear: the loyal general, the devoted noblewoman, and the sinister clown. The roles are almost complete. The Sheng, Dan, and Cho roles are all present. But if this play is to be performed with true justice, one role is still missing. It lacks the Jing, the character with the fiercest temper, the one who dares to flip the table and set the rules. Now he understands. This is an unfinished tragedy. These spirits are trapped within their own sorrowful stories, unable to find an ending. The key to breaking this cycle isn't applause or some strange ritual. It simply needs a judge to bring the curtain down. Since they need someone to flip the table, he decides he will be the one. He remembers the plays his father loved most. When the Jing character takes the stage, he represents the rules and the laws of heaven. He distinguishes right from wrong instantly. He is a true pillar of character. To be a man is to be like the Jing. Black is black, and white is white. One must have a scale in their heart and a spine that stays straight. He scoffs under the moonlight, a bitter sound. He shakes his head with a pained smile, lost in his own memories. His father's loyalty never met a good end, and his mother's kindness in saving the dying only resulted in her white clothes being stained with blood. Grief and madness, like a volcano dormant for eons, suddenly erupt from the deepest part of his soul with terrifying force. He sneers at the irony of it all. What a tragic play, what a miserable end, what a joke of eternal loyalty. He steps onto the ruined stage, his very bones resonating like thunder. If they want a performance, he will give them one they'll never forget. We see him walk to the very edge of the stage, meticulously straightening his clothes, for he knows that appearance is the first step toward dignity. But the stillness here doesn't belong to the stage. It belongs to the role he is about to play as he transforms himself into the Jing. He lets out a thunderous roar directed at the altar of the five tones, a sound that shakes the very air. This shout carries no melodic charm or operatic grace. It is fueled by nothing but pure, unadulterated questioning and rage. He drops to one knee and slams a heavy fist onto the stage, a strike that finally gives a voice to all his suppressed grievances. The altar of the five tones crumbles as the resentment dissipates, and with a sharp turn, he shifts his gaze toward the altar of the light robe. He tells the spirit that the scoundrel she loved was never worthy of her, especially when so many commoners were starving across the land. There were so many pitiful women in the world, yet she, a noble consort standing high above the rest, chose to seek death over a few trivial matters of the heart. He asks her if she truly deserved to be the mother of a nation. He declares that he will be the one to bring her tragedy to a close, ending the cycle once and for all. A voice cuts through, mocking him, claiming he isn't a Jing at all, but merely a madman who has wandered onto the stage to run wild. The resentment from the altars of the five tones and the light robe, which had been suppressed, suddenly surges back with a vengeance. This wasn't a resolution. It was seen as a desecration by an outsider, and the clown continues to mock him for his arrogance. The Jing curls his lip into a smile, though to be honest, there isn't a trace of warmth to be found in that expression. The entire theater falls into a stunned silence as he points to his own chest, his voice sounding hoarse and strained. He claims his own reality is 10,000 times more real than their broken play, and today, he will use his own body as the canvas. The blade sinks into his flesh and slides downward, using his own blood to paint a new score in a truly gruesome display. In this way, he paints the mask of a man who is upright and incorruptible, yet burdened by a sea of blood and born for revenge. Death is painful, of course, but the smile on his face only grows more manic. The swaying halls of the White Tiger and Changmin Palace are completely subdued in this moment, including that arrogant altar of the faces of all living beings that thought itself so enlightened. The expressions on 1,000 masks freeze completely, all of them dissolving into a state of pure, unadulterated terror. He declares that while he is Su Tiansheng, he is also the Jing, and now, no one would dare call him a fraud. He is the Gu, the lonely one on a night of reunion, and the heir, the son whose parents are gone and whose vengeance remains unfulfilled. His is the hatred of an unjust world. He doesn't just play a tragic god, for his own reality is far more bitter. A massive explosion erupts from the altar of the White Tiger Hall as the killing intent and resentment finally begin to dissipate. Immediately after, the altar of Changmin Palace crumbles, and the phoenix crown shatters into 1,000 tiny pieces. They turn into a sky full of brilliant golden light, while the final altar of the faces of all living beings lets out a series of cries and laughs. After a long, repetitive sigh, the expressions on every mask vanish, transforming into billions of shimmering golden particles. 3 distinct beams of golden light intertwine, their brilliance clashing, and before we can even catch our breath, a pillar of light as red as fresh blood descends from the heavens like a divine spear. It pierces through the golden light instantly, a sight from a forgotten myth that leaves him stunned and unable to react. The 3 scattered golden lights then transform into 3 massive torrents of information, pouring violently into his mind as 3 completely different afterimages begin to manifest in his consciousness. We see a general planting flowers in a mass grave after death, and a noble consort ascending as an empress to rule the world. We see a clown remove his mask to shed a single tear for a beggar, and in that moment, the rewards become clear. 3 treasures now hover above the altars, but his legs give way, and he collapses onto one knee. The toll on his mind and spirit has been far too great, so he pulls out a bottle of essence blood and drinks it all at once. A surge of life force washes through his body, healing his wounds at high speed as he slowly stands back up. He approaches the altar of the White Tiger Hall, where his eye of truth reveals the name of the prize, the Overlord's armor. It significantly boosts physical defense and damage, and its second ability, Last Stand, triggers when surrounded by 3 or more elite enemies. The Overlord's might effect scales with the number of enemies, a truly magnificent find. His eyes gleam with excitement at this passive skill. It seems almost tailor-made for his fighting style. After that, he makes his way toward the altar of Changmin Palace. Floating above is a jade pendant shimmering with radiant light, known as the Qingqing Jade, a legendary item from the Dan series. Its primary function is to deflect single-target attacks, giving him a chance to redirect them toward any other nearby units. His expression turns a bit strange. This item is undeniably wicked, a perfect counter for any assassin. Finally, he turns his gaze to the right. He looks at the altar of the faces of all living beings. If that clown hadn't pushed him to the brink at the last moment, he never would have achieved that blood-infused breakthrough. In a way, that very clown was the one who perfected him. He steps forward and firmly grasps a dark red tooth in his hand. This is the Reverse Fong, a legendary item of the Cho series. Its first function is an eye for an eye. Whenever he is struck by a negative status effect, there is a chance to trigger a counter-strike, weakening the effect and reflecting it back onto the attacker. As for the second function, it provides a constant, fixed probability to simply bounce negative states away entirely. 3 legendary tier items in one go. This was a massive haul. Finally, he lifts his head to look elsewhere. His gaze locks onto the very center of the stage, the exact spot where that blood-red heavenly light had struck earlier. This is the true prize, and his heart begins to race uncontrollably. 3 legendary items are a fortune, but that pillar of blood-red light that descended from the heavens was something far more dominant and overbearing. It had pierced through 3 golden lights like a divine spear. It was undoubtedly a mythic tier item. To be honest, he hadn't expected this. Nothing like this had ever happened before. He cautiously approaches the spot where a faint, flickering light remains. It turns out to be a painted skin, as thin as a cicada's wing. His eye of truth activates, revealing its name, the Lingren Score, a mythic item of the Jing series. Its power, heart-piercing majesty, strikes fear into the soul of anyone who dares to look at him. Their will to fight simply withers away. He lets out a triumphant laugh. This heart-piercing majesty is truly formidable. It is powerful in the most literal sense, and what is even more terrifying is that this Jing series contains 7 distinct pieces. If the entire 7-piece set consists of mythic tier items, we can only imagine the sheer spectacle once they are all gathered together. The moon is exceptionally round tonight, and he feels a sense of relief. After this ordeal, his mood has brightened considerably. He recalls the other 2 sentences from the letter. Those artists are already growing impatient and can hardly wait any longer. They are currently conducting their final rehearsals, and it seems he especially wants to meet him after tonight's performance. The fog has finally lifted. Those 3 from the theater of the heavens, are they not the most pure of artists? Following this logic, he realizes he actually knew one of them before ever encountering the theater. With a single thought, a ticket with scorched edges appears out of thin air in his hand. It is the admission ticket for the 4th act. The 4444 Sorrowful Theater, home to a tragic heroine trapped in an eternal cycle of reincarnation upon the stage. The artist, the heroine, all the clues finally connect into a single line, the one mentioned in the letter. In all probability, is this eternal heroine of the Sorrowful Theater. He remembers the photo of Xiao Weiwei he used as a trap, that hated and despised photograph which earned him this ticket. This was the karmic bond already forged between him and that heroine. No wonder the Eye of Truth saw it as karma. To be honest, it seems there is still a reckoning to be settled later. He instinctively checks the date on his phone, August 14th. Tomorrow is the Mid-Autumn Festival, the day of the final rehearsal. The meaning is clear now. What is to be staged tomorrow is not some festive celebration at all, but rather the official performance by the artists of the Sorrowful Theater for the entire world line. 2 life-threatening questions now loom before him. First, will this meeting with the eternal heroine be a blessing or a curse? And second, In what form will these artists descend tomorrow? A sharp glint of determination flashes in his eyes as he considers his options. He suddenly pulls 3 major items from his storage: the Abyss Magic Dragon Egg, the Soul Wall, and the Bloodline. He reaches out a finger to gently touch the Soul Wall, feeling a chill that somehow connects directly to his own spirit. This object has shielded him from countless spiritual shocks, and now his gaze shifts toward the Bloodline concentric bone. 2 bone insects, one large and one small, crawl obediently onto his fingertips as he decides they shall share the name Soul Bone. Finally, he looks at the Abyss Magic Dragon Egg rubbing against his arm, deciding its previous nickname wasn't quite right. Soul Wall, Soul Bone, and Soul Egg. It seems our protagonist has officially formed his own little soul squad. Just then, his phone vibrates with a call from Zhao Gang, who excitedly addresses him as Mr. Su. He reports that Xinghe's test results are all back, and every single indicator has returned to normal. Su wishes him a happy Mid-Autumn festival and learns that Zhao Gang has successfully made contact with the Black Shadow. He was accepted immediately as a peripheral core member, a title that makes Su pause for a moment. Like Xia Weiwei, he is still an outsider, yet it seems the hierarchy of this Black Shadow organization is incredibly strict. Zhao Gang mentions he has been assigned to a large logistics warehouse in Qingdong, a detail Su notes carefully. A flash of realization crosses his eyes. It isn't that chemical plant after all. He tells Zhao Gang to watch, listen, and stay safe. After hanging up, he sits under the eaves, eating a mooncake with a bit of wine as the night settles in. A bitter smile plays on his lips as he whispers to the memory of his father to watch closely. Suddenly, the bright moon is swallowed by dark clouds, and the entire world is plunged into instant darkness. Rain begins to fall from the pitch-black sky as he checks his phone. It is exactly midnight. It is now the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, the Mid-Autumn Festival, a time for peace and family reunions. He utters a few words of blessing, exhausting the last of his warmth as a cold, killing intent begins to radiate from him. He picks up the large black umbrella leaning against the door and snaps it open with a sharp motion. Shielded from the gray rain that erases all things supernatural, he steps into the endless downpour without looking back. Even with an unknown danger looming over the horizon, he decides he must first dismantle one of the Black Shadow's strongholds. Black Shadow, he thinks, I'm coming for you.